Hello everyone and welcome to our course. My name is Joe Paris and I'm going to take you through a brief introduction, how to use this course, and then really how to get the maximum out of this course in this lecture. And then in our next lecture, I'm going to show you how you can get a hold of us to really get your questions answered and to really use this course to its maximum potential. So to begin our course here, we're going to give you a brief introduction to how to use databases and what databases are in MySQL. And Ashutosh does a wonderful job of just kind of explaining this, and he does a really awesome job as well explaining everything else in this course, but I do think the introduction is very important. Now, before you move any further in this course, it is very important too that you also have a very good understanding of how to work with Android applications in general before you even start this course. This is for more advanced students. However, if you have a base understanding or if you're trying to learn something new and really push yourself outside your comfort zone, well then stay with us and you can enjoy watching the lectures as well. But if you haven't gotten to that point yet, you can feel free to check out our best-selling course on Android application development, and it's over 17 hours long, and Ashutosh does a wonderful job. It's received a ton of really excellent reviews, and we think that that's a great place to start. And if you want to then join us afterwards in this course, you already got it. So let's move on with what you're going to get from the rest of this course. We're going to show you data insertion, how to connect the Android application database directly to using it right in the Android application and using that all together. We're then going to go into online databases using PHP to connect the database there. You learn how to set up an online database and how this all connects with PHP. We're then going to introduce you to JSON, and in this lecture, we're going to talk about why JSON is used, how it's used, and give you some examples there. And then we're going to wrap up the course showing you an Android application using JSON to receive data in a few different parts. So at the end of the lectures as well, there are little descriptions in case you want to check those out to kind of see what the lecture is about before you watch it. Also, we have the source code for the entire course at the bottom lecture as well. We want to just make you aware of that. We want you to use the source code if you have any issues, but at the same time, I think the best way to learn is to actually try and do yourself. So just wanted to give you a brief overview of what this course has to offer, what it's going to look like, and if you have any questions at all, we're going to get into that, and we're going to explain to you the best way to use this course coming up in our next lecture. Stay tuned. Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to discuss how you can get your questions answered and the best way to use this course for you. So what's the best way to use this course? Well, depending upon your skill level and what you're looking to get out of this course, you can use this course how you see fit. And I think that's very, very important. If there's just maybe one or two lectures that you are really interested in, and that's all you want to watch is just maybe, the introduction and a couple other lectures, well, that's all you need to watch. And you know what? That right there is a success. If you want to watch the entire course and then, use every part of this course, that is a great success as well. But we want you to understand that you can use this course how you see fit. If you need to skip through a few lectures or you want to skip around, whatever you want to do, it's your decisions. But the best way to use this course, also from complete beginner to advanced, is to go from the top to bottom, all the way from the introduction. It gives you a very well-rounded perspective. But again, maybe you just want to learn data insertion. Maybe you just want to learn about JSON. Well, all the power to you. You can learn exactly what you want to learn in this course. This course is designed for you. Now, if you have any questions in the course, all you have to do is click on the button that says Ask Question, or Add Discussion, and you'll be able to add a discussion question to the course, and Ashutosh and myself will do our best to get to you in a very timely manner. Now, we do serve thousands of students and we get questions every single day, so we appreciate your patience in trying to answer these questions. But for now, just wanted to offer that to you as well in case you got stuck. And last but not least, too, remember the source code is in the course, so make sure that you check out the source code before maybe asking a question. Maybe that'll help answer your question for you, and you'll be able to move on very easily with the course. So thanks again for watching, and we look forward to teaching you more. And now Ashutosh is going to take you through the introduction to our course.
Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are basically going to learn how we could design Android applications using PHP and MySQL. So basically in this set of tutorials we are basically going to learn how to develop Android applications and use the MySQL database in order to basically store the data onto an online server so as to basically make the application access data from the server whenever we need it. So if we want to actually design an Android application, the Android application actually consists of three main parts. So the very first part is basically the graphical user interface of our application. So the graphical user interface of our application is nothing but the look and feel of the application, such as the menu items, the buttons, and all that kinds of stuff. And the next part of our application is actually the the core logic. So let's go ahead and list some of the parts of our Android application. So the very first part is going to be the user interface. So user interface is one of the crucial part which basically allows us to interact with the application. So basically the main purpose of the user interface is to, we could say, let the user interact with the application. So this is the main purpose of the user interface. Now the next most important component of our Android application is nothing but the actual logic which is used in order to, what you could say, perform some action depending upon the user interaction. So the main logic of our Android application is mostly written in Java. So Java is basically one of the crucial languages which we will need to learn in order to understand or in order to develop complex Android applications. And also I forgot a thing like which interface or which language you need to use in order to design the interface. So this is basically the XML. So we'll basically need the XML for the user interface. And for the second part, which is nothing but the logical part, so the main logic behind our application is basically going to decide how our application performs, or we could say how our application responds to user interaction. So basically user interaction is nothing but clicking of buttons, scrolling the app, or pinching the screen, and all those kinds of interactions. Now the logic, like what happens when the user interacts in different manner, is actually written in Java. So Java is basically used to write the logic of our application, and XML is used to design the user interface. So in this tutorial series, our main focus would be on the third part, and the third and the most important part in almost any application is nothing but designing the database so as to store the data related to your application. Now some of the applications are like where you don't need to store data, like the calculator application, in which basically you perform some calculation and you actually don't need to store in much data when you basically exit out of the application. But in most of the applications and in most of the cases, we actually need to use or store data somewhere, either be it in the phone, or let's say we store the data in some online database. But the thing is that we actually need to handle data in a certain Android application. So the most important part of any Android application is learning how to process data and how to actually store the data. So this is the third part, which is called as the data, and that part actually helps us to, you could say, helps to save and manipulate data. So for the logic, the language which we use is nothing but Java, and for the last part, which is nothing but the data part, we use something which is called as PHP and MySQL. Now you might be familiar with these languages, and it is actually good if you study these two languages so as to basically what you could say connect your application to a database. And we are also going to learn what are databases. So even if you know what databases are, it would be a good revision for you, like learning what are databases. So whenever we are talking about data for any software, the entire data of any software is actually stored at a position which is called as the database, that is the base of the data. So basically, a database is nothing but the collection of data which our application is going to use. Now, the data is actually stored in a very organized fashion in a database. So let's say if you want, if you are creating an application for a school, so we do not randomly throw data in a database, like each and every information in a database, but instead what we do is that we organize this data in a very proper what you could say format, so that it would be easy for us to actually retrieve the data whenever we want. So the data in the database is actually stored in the form of tables. So let's say you are creating some application in which you want to actually store in the what you could say the first name, the last name, and the login name of a user. So in that case, what we could do is that we could create a table, and the rows of a table, or sorry, the columns of a table are going to represent the various attributes such as the login name, the first name, the last name, and the actual rows of these table are basically going to be the entries inside the table. So for example, if we actually want to check if what is the first name of a person who has a login Mark, so in that case we move to this row which has the login name as Mark, and then we check his first name is Samuel. So that's basically how the database works. So in databases, we basically store the data organized in a table. So let's say you are creating an Android application in which you want to store the data related to students. So instead of throwing in the data directly into the database, what we do is that we actually create a new table for a student, and in order to list out the properties of the student or the attributes of the student, we design different number of columns for each attribute. So in case of a student, let's say the attributes might be name, the contact, address, the subjects which the student is going to study, the marks obtained by the student, and many other attributes just like that. So basically we create a table and we basically store the entire data in a tabular format into the database. So it's extremely important that we study databases in much more depth, and the main reason for that is, in case of Android application, what we could do is that we could use the data, we could store the data on an online database, and we could actually process data, retrieve data, and use the data to our advantage in our Android application. So let's say if you actually want to create an application which actually sends the data to other users, so in that case what we do is that we simply create a database, we create some slots in the database so as to save the data, and we actually save the data into the database. So this was the basic intro, like what databases are. And also one more thing which I would like to mention here is that we actually also need to understand some basic PHP so as to continue with this tutorial. And even if you don't have a basic understanding of PHP, and if you could grasp any programming language quickly, then PHP is not a difficult language to learn, and you could learn PHP along the way in this course as we move along. And also in order to actually perform database operations like insertion, update, delete, and alter, and all the other operations, we are also going to need to learn the MySQL queries for inserting, updating, and deleting. And it is very simple, but the only thing is that if you are not aware of these languages or how these things work, so please pay close attention and you will be fine. And also one more thing is that we actually need to have web hosting server so as to make our application run. So in this tutorial we are basically going to use an online server as well as a server or a virtual server which we'll be creating on our computer. There are also some installations which we need to done before even starting this tutorial. So in the next tutorial we'll basically learn how to basically set up a virtual server on our device, or we could say on our personal computer. And we are also going to learn how to use PHP so as to connect the database. We are also going to create a database in the next tutorial, and we are basically going to have an actual look into the database, how the database looks like, how we could store data, or how we could store the tables into the database, and how we could store information inside the table which are actually present in the database. So that's it for this tutorial. So this was the basic intro so as to give you an overview like how databases actually work in an Android application. So basically the main purpose of studying databases is that most of the times when you are creating an Android application for any purpose, you will need to store the data on an online database so that the users could actually retrieve and save the data from the database. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood what is the main significance of using the database in our Android applications. And there are actually many methods, or we could say many ways to basically connect your Android application to the database, but for the sake of this course we'll be studying how to actually connect our Android application by using PHP and MySQL databases. And we'll be doing it by using the local host, and also we'll try to do this by using the online server. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to learn basically how to install XAMPP on our computer and how to basically set up a database on the local host so that we could basically use the database in order to store the data. So the very first thing which we need to do is that as we will be working with a database which is an online database, we will need an online server, or at least a server which basically helps us to add data into a database. So the very best thing which we could do in this case is we could download some software which provides us a server on our local host, so that basically we could send queries to the local host, and we could actually set up a database, a virtual database on the local host and access it. So the very first thing which we do is that we download an application which is called as XAMPP. So in order to download XAMPP, we type XAMPP, which is XAMPP download, and the first link which is going to pop up is from the apachefriends.org. So basically this venture actually has their own application which is called as XAMPP. So basically when you click on the link, you will be redirected to a page which has download links for Windows, Linux as well as Mac, or the OS X version of the Mac. And now the next thing which you need to do is that you simply need to download XAMPP and install it. So I would basically recommend you to download this version of XAMPP, which is 5.3, which is basically 5.5.33. So in order to download it, simply click this button, and it is going to ask you whether to download the file. So simply click on save file, and then it will, and once the file is downloaded and when you open it, it is going to direct you through the entire installation process. And the installation process is quite simple, and you actually don't need to remember anything regarding the installation. So basically once the installation is done, the next thing which you could do is that you could close this browser, you could go onto the search bar and simply type in XAMPP, which is XAMPP, and it should redirect you to a control panel. So basically you need to actually check if XAMPP is actually installed on your computer. So if you open this thing up, you will be prompted with this window. Now actually when you download and install XAMPP, the server is not automatically going to start. So basically in order to start the XAMPP server, you need to open this thing up, which is nothing but the XAMPP control panel, And this control panel actually has options to basically start the Apache, which is the server, the MySQL, which we'll be using in order to save our databases. So basically, when you open this thing up, the next thing to do would be simply click on start. So as you could see, the Apache, which is nothing but the server, has started. Now we also need to start up this MySQL, so also click start over here. And in order to make sure that everything is running properly, simply open up your web browser and simply type in localhost. So once XAMPP is actually installed properly on your computer, and when you go to the browser and when you type in localhost, this should be the page which you should be redirected, and this states that we have successfully downloaded and installed XAMPP on our computer. Now once XAMPP is actually downloaded, the next thing which we will do is that we actually need to switch to this PHP myadmin. So this PHP myadmin is nothing but it's like an admin panel, basically, to, you could say, control the databases, control everything which is present in the backend. So this is basically the admin panel for your website. So for example, if you have ever purchased like a domain name and a hosting for any website, you will be also presented with the same PHP myadmin web panel. So this panel actually has functionalities to basically create a new database, create tables inside a database, and actually maintain your databases. So the very first thing which we will need to do here is that we actually need to create a database. So in order to create a new database, a brand new database, the very first thing which we do is that we open up PHP myadmin, and as you could see, this is the window which you should be presented when you open up PHP myadmin. And as you could see, there is this thing which is called as new, which basically is used to create a new database. So in order to create a new database, we simply click on this, and it is going to ask us the name of the database. So let's name this thing as project, and then simply click create, and you should be prompted with a small window which says database project created. So as you could see, when we create our new database, our database should be added up over here. Now once we have the database, we actually need to add in what you could say a table to the database, which is eventually going to hold the information which we are going to pass in. So let's create a table which is called as users. So let's say we want a table of users, which is basically going to, let's say, hold the user information like the username and the login password. So, and it is also going to ask us to enter the number of columns. So let's say the number of columns are 4, then click go. So when you click go, you will be prompted with this type of window, which basically asks us to enter the fields inside the table. Now let's say for a user, we need to save his name, his contact, his country, and his password. So in order to save it, in order to store these things into database, we actually need to allocate names to each and every field. So as we want to store the person's name, let's name the first thing as name, and for the second one, let's name it as password, to store password. Then let's name the third field as contact, and let's say the final one is like his country. And once you have set up the names for the fields, the next thing to do would be to select the type or select the type. So type is nothing but it is going to basically ask us what we want to store in the name. So for the name, we are going to select text. For the password as well, we are going to go with text, and similarly for the other two fields, we are going to select text. Now basically, if you are storing the contact number of a person, you basically need to go with a field which says integer, but for the sake of simplicity, we are going to simply select this as a text. Now once we have set up the fields inside a table, and once we have set up the type of these fields, we could simply go ahead and hit save, And what this thing is going to do is that it is basically going to create a table for us with these 4 fields. So as you could see, now we have successfully created a brand new table which basically holds these 4 values. So the very first value is name, the second one is the password, then we have contact, and then we have country. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to insert some values into the database. Now the thing is that you could easily add values by using SQL. So if you are familiar with SQL, you could simply select this option right here, and then what you could do is that you could basically type in a SQL query so as to basically insert values in the database. But as we want our Android application to basically communicate with the database, the very first thing which we need to do is that we need to write a PHP script which allows us, or which allows our Android application to connect with the database. So the very first PHP script which we are going to write here is the script for connecting to the database. So now let's go ahead and write a simple script so as to connect ourselves with the database. So we simply close this thing and we open up our text editor. So I'm going to be using Atom, so I simply open up the Atom text editor, and inside the text editor we actually need to create a PHP script so as to make the connection with our database. So we simply go to File, create a new file, and what we are going to do is that we are going to save this file in the PHP format. And one more important thing which we need to remember while creating or saving this file is that we actually need to save this file in the location where all the files related to the server are actually present. So the very first thing which we do is that we check where our actual server is located. So if we open up File Explorer and go to C, and if we go to this folder which says XAMPP, and inside XAMPP we actually need to go in the htdocs folder. So this is basically a folder where we'll be saving our entire files, and in order to organize it in a much more proper way, let's go ahead and create a brand new folder, and let's name this as project. This should be project, and we are going to save our entire files in the project folder. And also make sure that you always save your files on the server inside XAMPP and inside a folder which is called as the htdocs. So this is the folder which is basically going to contain all the server files which we will be using. So, and also you could go ahead and create some folders in there so as to basically organize all the things in a proper fashion. So once we are done with this, we switch back to this PHP script and we save this in the same location. So go to File, click Save, and then basically go to the C drive, XAMPP, htdocs, and the folder which we will be using for this project is going to be project, and let's name this thing as init.php, and simply click Save. And as you could see, now our file is stored in this particular folder which is project. So this is the file right over here. So now the next thing which we do is that we actually start writing the PHP script. So basically, as this PHP script is going to be for establishing a connection to the database, so the very first thing which we need to do is that we actually need to pass in the database name. So in order to check what our database name is, we again go to localhost, then we go to phpMyAdmin, and as you could see, the project is the name of our database. So basically we return back here, and then we store this thing, or we store the name of the database into a variable. So in order to declare a variable in database, we type $, then we type the variable name. So let's say we name it as db_name, which stands for database name, and then we type in the name of our database, which is nothing but project. Now the next thing which we do is that we also type in the username of the database. So by default, the name or the username of the database is root. So we type mysql _user, and let's name the user as root. So root is the by default name. Now we also need to pass in the server name. So we create another variable called as server name, and server name is going to be local host. So once we have these three things set up, the next thing which we do is that we set up a connection. So we create another variable and let's name it as connection. So we type $connection equals mysqli underscore connect. So this is basically used in order to establish a connection, and to this we are going to pass in the parameters. So the very first parameter is going to be the server name. So we type $server name. Then the next parameter which we are going to pass is going to be the username. So the username is $mysql underscore user, and the next thing which we type in is going to be the password, and in this case by default the password is blank, so we are going to leave this field as blank. And the final thing which we are going to pass in to this is going to be the name of the database. So we type $db underscore name. So once we are done with this, we are basically good to go, and we have connected this thing to a database. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to check if this query is correct. So in order to make sure that the query written here is correct, we type if, and inside it we type if $connection, or let's say if not $connection, that means this line of code is returning a value false. So if it is not connected, then we want to print out the connection is unsuccessful. So we type echo connection not successful, or else we want to type in connection successful. So we type echo connection successful. So once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. So we simply save the code, and in order to check if this script performs correctly, we switch back to the browser, and in there we type localhost, and in localhost we have a folder which we have created which is named as project, and give a slash, and the file is nothing but init.php, which actually contains the PHP script to connect to the database. So once we have typed this thing in, we hit enter, and as you could see, we got the result as connection successful. So that's basically it for this tutorial, and that's how you basically connect to a MySQL database server by using PHP. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll learn how to basically add some elements to the database using PHP, and also how to extract the data from the database using PHP scripts. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to learn how to basically insert some values into the database. So the very first thing which we need to do is that we need to go to the phpMyAdmin, and as you could see, this is the database right here, which is nothing but it is called as project. So simply open this thing up, and when we go to users, as you could see, there is nothing right now in our table. So basically when you go to structure, as you could see, these are the 4 fields in which we could insert values, but we have not yet added a script so as to insert the values into the database. So in the previous tutorial we have created this table which is called as users inside the database called as project, and this table is empty right now, so we actually need to add in data to this database. And in the previous tutorial we have also created a script which is called as init.php. So the script init.php is basically a script which is used to connect to the database. So in order to test the script, we simply typed in localhost, then the name of our folder was project, and we typed in init.php, and we got the result as connection successful, which basically means that we are now connected to the database. Now our next step would be, once the connection is successful, we actually need to insert some values into the database using MySQL statements. So basically As we have created a script for connecting to a database using PHP, we are now going to create a PHP script so as to basically enter values into the database. So again, we open up our favorite text editor. So mine is Atom. So I'm going to open up Atom, and I'm going to basically create a new script in Atom. So I go to File, New File, and let's type in a PHP tag here. So PHP, and we are going to save this file in the same folder as we have stored the init file. So simply go ahead and save this thing. So basically go to C, XAMPP, htdocs and project, and let's name this thing as, let's say you want to basically sign up the user. So we type the file name as register.php, click save, and once the file is saved, we could go ahead and write in some code so as to insert some values. Now the very first thing which we need to do is that we actually need to connect to the database so that we could actually insert some values into it. So basically, in order to connect to the database, we need this script right here. So what you could do is that instead of just copying and pasting the entire things of this script over here in register.php, we could use a simple thing which is called as require. So we type in require, and in double quotes we type in the name of the file, which is nothing but init.php. So what this thing basically does is that it is going to execute the line of code which is present in init.php, and after it is going to execute the next line of code which we are going to write in. So once we have basically established a connection, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to insert the values. So now we have 4 values to fill in. So the very first value which we are going to pass in is name, then the password, then contact, and then the country. So in order to fill these values using PHP, MySQL, we type in, first we create the variables. So we type $name, and in there we are going to pass in the name. So I'm going to pass in my name. Then after the name, we are going to pass in the password. So I type $password, and let's say my password is like Ashu123. And now the next thing which we pass in is the contact number. So I pass in my contact number. So we type $contact equals, and let's say my contact number is 0000 and 0. And after this we pass our country. So again we type in $country equals, and type in the country name. Okay, so once we have these 4 variables set up, then we form a SQL query so as to basically insert these values into the database. So we type $SQL underscore query. This should be SQL, not SQLite. So $SQL underscore query equals, and in double quotes we type in our query. So the basic SQL query so as to insert values into the database is insert, then after insert we type insert into, and then we type in the database name. So the name of our database is users, so insert into users. After that we type in values, VALUES, and then after this we pass in the values in brackets. So the very first value which we want to pass in is the name, so we type $name. After this we pass in the second value which is password, so we type $password. After this we pass in the contact, so we type $contact. After this the country, so we type in $country. This should be N. So, and actually I have misspelled country here, CO. This should be, there should be a U here. Okay, so now once this query is set up, we are good to go. And also make sure that you include these things in double quotes. So there should be, these variables should be actually mentioned in single quotes. So make sure that you do this thing. So insert quotes everywhere. So once you have added the quotes, the next thing which we do is that we basically end this statement with a semicolon, which is nothing but which is the MySQL query, and also end the PHP statement with a semicolon. And also I've made a mistake here. This should be insert. Okay, so once we are done with setting up the SQL query, we could finally go ahead and run this query. So in order to run this query, if we type in if mysqli underscore query, and to the query, and to this we pass in the connection variable. So we type $connection, even if the connection variable is not actually present in the register.php, but if we switch to the init, as you could see, the connection variable is present right over here. So we pass in the connection as well as the SQL query. So we type $SQL query. So what this thing does is that it returns us the result, and actually I again made a mistake here. This should be SQL query. So once this thing is done, the next thing which we do is that on executing this query, we want to display like the data has been inserted. So we type echo and type in data inserted. Or else if the query actually has an error, and if there is a problem inserting values into the database, we want to echo like error. So basically once we are done with this, we are good to go. So we simply save the code and we run this thing on the server. So we go right here, and instead of init.php, now we type register.php and hit enter. And as you could see, we got the result as connection successful, data inserted. So in order to check if the data is actually inserted into the database, what we do is that we switch to this localhost right here, and we go inside the table, which is nothing but users. So we simply click on it, and as you could see, we have the values of name, password, contact, and country right over here. So basically we are successful in inserting the records into the database. So basically once we are done with inserting values into the database, the next thing would be to basically retrieve the data from the database. So for retrieving values from the database, we are going to create one more script. So let's name this script as, let's say, the script to basically, let's say, login. So basically we have the user info. Now we are going to check the user info present in the database with the info provided by us, and if they match up, then we go ahead and print out the value inside the database. So let's create a new script for login. So create a new file. Again, this is also going to be a PHP file, and let's go ahead and save this file in the same location. So C XAMPP htdocs and the project folder. So let's name this as login.php, hit enter, and now let's go ahead and type in the code so as to basically make the user login. So in order to save time, we are going to copy the contents of this file right here, and the reason for this is that basically the code is going to be the same with a few changes here and there. So the very first thing which we change is that we change the SQL query. So now what we want to do here is that we want to query the database and check if a person which has the username Ashu and the password as Ashu123 is actually present in the database. So basically in order to check, the query is different. So for checking the value, for checking if the value is present, we use a query which is called as select. So we type select, and the name of the element which we want to select here is, let's say, name. So we select name from, and then we type in the name of the database from which we want to basically search. So the name of the database is nothing but users. So we type select name from users, where Now the where is basically a keyword which is used to search where, or it is used to specify a condition. So from users where name is like $name. So basically we want to search for a value where name is actually equal to the variable $name, or the value which is present in the $name, and password like $password. So this is the basic SQL query which we want to execute. So once this query is done, we specify a semicolon, and the next thing which we do is that we also ensure that these things are actually present in double quotes. So make sure that you don't miss on double quotes here, or else your code is not going to work properly. So make sure that you give double quotes, and also end the SQL statement with a semicolon. Now once this thing is done, we are also going to make a modification here. So basically we are going to delete this, and in there we are going to keep this line of code which is basically used for executing the SQL query, and actually we are going to store it in a variable called result. So we type result equals MySQL query, and basically the execution result is going to be stored in the variable called result. Now the main purpose of storing this into the result variable is that we are going to need to use this result variable in the next line of code. So basically once we have the result in hand, we actually use an if condition so as to check if we actually get any result. So we type if, and then we type in MySQLi underscore num underscore rows, and to this we are going to pass in the result. So we type $result, and if this thing is greater than 0, and what this line of code means is that if the number of rows in actual result, if it is greater than 0, that means we have found a match to the username and the password. So in that case, what we want to do is that we basically want to, what you could say, display out the username. So we type $row equals, and basically we fetch that particular row, and fetching is nothing but saving the data of that row. So we type MySQLi underscore, this should be my, not mu, MySQLi underscore fetch underscore ASSOC, and to this we pass in the result. So we type $result. So what this thing is going to do is that it is going to fetch the row associated with that particular result, and we are actually going to get the value of the name. So in order to save the value of name, we type $name equals, and we type in $row, and within the row we actually want a parameter which is called as name. So what this line of code is going to do, it is basically going to extract the name from the row, and it is going to store it into a variable called name. So once we have the name, we simply need to echo out the name. So we type echo and simply type in $name. So after this we go inside the else block, and we actually replace, and we actually type in an error if this thing does not happen well. So once we are done with this, we basically save the code and we try to run this thing and check if the login is successful. So we type in login.php, and as you could see, the login is successful, and we actually got the name of the user, which is Ashu. And now let's go ahead and let's change the password to some random things so as to check if this thing actually performs correctly. So again, we return back to the browser, and when we refresh it this time, we got an error, and the reason for that is the username and password does not match up. Now again, if we change this thing to the initial value and save it, and if we return back here and if we refresh it, we are going to get the result as connection successful, and it is also going to return us the value of the user. So that's it for this tutorial, and this is basically how you insert the values into a database using PHP and MySQL. And this is how we basically, what you could say, retrieve the values to check if the value is actually present in the database. So the reason why we are going through this is that basically we need to clear up the concepts related to PHP and MySQL, and these are the same exact scripts which we will be using while connecting our Android application to an online database. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how to basically insert values and retrieve values from a database using PHP and MySQL. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are finally going to create our Android application, and we are going to link our Android application with a database which is a localhost database. And basically we are going to make the Android application insert some data into the database, and later on we are going to check if the data is actually entered into the database. So the very first thing which we need to do here is that we actually need to create a brand new Android Studio project. So make sure that you create a new project, and let's name this project as, let's say, demo database. Then click next. Select the API level to be 15, click next. Select a blank activity, click next. And let the name of your main activity be main activity, and finally click finish. So basically once your project is ready with you, the next thing which you could do is that you could take the further steps to basically connect your application with the database. So basically what we want to do here is that this is our database right here, and we actually want to insert values over here. So in the previous tutorial we have inserted values by using PHP, and we have directly inserted values by placing the values in the PHP script. But for the sake of this tutorial we are going to insert the values using an Android application. So once your Android application is ready, we make a few changes over here. So the very first thing which we do is that we go inside the main activity, we remove the extra code over here. So make sure that you remove the toolbar and everything like that, and the reason is we don't need it. Now just save your project. And one more thing which you need to do here is that you basically need to create a brand new activity so as to basically allow you to insert data into the database. So in order to create a new activity, we go to the Java folder, we go to the first folder which has the main activity, go to new, select an activity and a blank activity, and let's name this activity as, let's say, register. So register is basically an activity which allows us to register the user with the application, and then finally click finish. And it is going to create a brand new activity for you. Now basically we are going to add some UI elements to this activity which has edit text, which allows us to basically enter the data, and we will place a button at the bottom which basically allows us to click the button and insert the values into the edit text. Insert the values from the edit text and put them all together into a database. Now as you could see, this is our register activity. Now the next thing which we do is that we add a few fields onto this register activity, which basically allows us to let's say enter values onto the application which could be later transferred into the database. So we are going to go with some text fields for plain text. So make sure that you select it and drag it and drop it right over here. So basically we are going to select 4 of them, and that is because our database actually has 4 values in it. So make sure that you drag and drop 4 fields, and also in order to change the size of 4 of them, simply select all of them, go to properties, and instead of wrap content we are going to make it match parent. So as you could see, these are our 4 fields. Now the next thing which we do is that we also place a button here. So basically whenever we press that button, we are going to basically take all these values present right over here and put them all together into the database. And so let's name this button as insert, and also make sure that you assign proper IDs to these text fields, and the reason for that is that we'll be referencing these fields by their ID so that proper values get inserted at proper position into your database. So the next thing which we do is that we actually check which fields are present onto our database. So if you're not sure what are the name of the fields of your database, simply open up Mozilla or any web browser, type in localhost, go to phpMyAdmin, go to the project, which is nothing but our database, go to the table which is called as users, and as you could see, these are the names of our field. The first one is name, second one is password, then we have contact, and then the country. So we switch back over here and we actually give, or we actually assign IDs to these text fields. So simply select first one, go to property, search for the property called ID, and as you could see, this is the ID. Change this thing to name, and for the second one, so this is basically going to pop up for the very first time. Simply select this and click yes. So the next field, or the name of the next field, or the ID of the next field is going to be password. So select the next one, change the ID to password, select the third one, change the ID to contact, select the final one and basically change the ID to country. And once this is done, we are good to go. So basically we close this thing because we don't need it right now. So now once we have the value of these 4 fields, the next thing which we do is that we basically write in the code to basically reference all these 4 fields so that we could actually access the data inside it. So in order to do that, what we do is that we go to register.java. So this is the register.java class file for this activity right here. So basically the very first thing which we do is that we remove the unnecessary elements like the toolbar and all that. So make sure that you remove it, and it's okay if you don't remove it, but I would recommend you to remove it. Now the next thing which we do is that inside here we get a reference to the edit text. So we go right here and type in edit text, and let's name the edit text as et, and let's name it as e underscore name. So this is the reference for the first edit text. Now let's name the second one as e underscore password. Let's name the third one as e underscore contact, and for the final one let's name it as e underscore country. So once we have these 4 edit texts, we could go ahead and we could basically go inside on create and have a reference to each of the edit text. So for the very first edit text, which is e underscore name, we type e underscore name equals, and basically typecast this thing to edit text even before referencing it. So we type edit text, and in order to reference it we use find view by ID, and inside it we type in r.id, and the ID of the very first edit text is name, so we type r.id.name. Now we do the same thing for the remaining 3 edit texts. So I am going to basically repeat the code for all of the 3 edit texts. So we type e underscore password equals, and again type in edit text to typecast it. Then we get a reference by find view by ID r dot id dot this should be password. Now for the third one, e_contact equals edit text find view by id r.id.contact, and for the final one, which is e_country equals edit text find view by id r.id.country. Okay, so now once we have the reference to all the 4 edit texts, we could go ahead and we could type in the code to basically extract the values from all the 3 edit texts. So the very first thing which we do is that we create some strings here to save the value. So we type string, and let's name the first string as name. Let's name the second string as password. Name the third one as contact. Name the fourth one as country. Okay, now once we have these 4 strings, we actually need to go ahead and extract a value from these text fields. So in order to extract the value, what we do is that we make the use of the onClick method of this button. So basically select this button, go to properties, and basically let's name the onClick of this method as register. So we type reg user. So let's say register user is the onClick method of this thing. So make sure that you name the onClick as reg user. Now return back to the register.java and create a method here called as user reg, or basically reg user. So we go ahead and type in public void reg user and make sure to pass in the view. So we type view, and within this we are basically going to extract the values from all the 4 edit texts. So the very first value which we extract is the name value. So we type name equals, so in order to get a reference, we type e_name, and basically the value is actually stored in e_name. So basically to get the value, we use a method which is called as getText. So we type e_name dot getText dot. So once we have the value, the next thing which we do is that we basically convert this value into a string. So we type e_name dot getText dot toString. So toString is basically a method which allows us to, what you could say, convert the value to a string. So basically we are going to do the same thing with the next 3 fields. So I'm basically going to copy it and I'm going to paste it thrice, and I'm going to simply change the values of these things. So this is going to be password, this thing is going to be contact, this thing is going to be country, and this thing is going to be e_password, this one is going to be e_contact, this thing is going to be e_country. Okay, now that we have the values extracted, the next thing which we need to do is that we basically need to process these values, and we basically need to put in these values into the database. So basically we have just extracted the values, and we are going to write in one more what you could say class, so as to process these values and basically send these values over to the database. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be writing another class which we will call as background task, which is basically going to take all these values and it is going to use some functions like and it is basically going to use some complex methods which allows us to send over these values to the database. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how to basically create a activity for basically inserting values into the database. So basically what we did is that we basically had 4 fields over here and a single button. So whenever we click this button, what we did in this tutorial is that we have extracted these 4 values, and after extracting these values we have basically converted them into a string, and right now the values are actually present in these 4 string variables which we have created right over here. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be creating another class to handle and put all these values into the database. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be finally creating the class which basically handles all the data and puts them all together into a database. So basically in the previous tutorial we have created this activity which is the register activity, and we have also written the code to basically extract the values from all the three fields from this. And basically we have created a button and we have added an on-click method to this button which allows us to extract these values and save them into a string. Now without wasting any time, let's go ahead and create a brand new class to basically insert values into database. So go to the Java folder, go to the very first folder and right click on it and create a new Java class. And remember, don't create an activity, create a simple single Java class and name this as background task. And the purpose of naming this as background task is because it is going to be a background task. It is going to get executed in the background and the user would be unaware of it. So simply click OK. And the very first thing which we do is that we are going to make this class extend async task. And basically the reason for doing that is we are basically going to inherit some methods from the async task. So make sure that you extend the async task. So we type extends async task, and basically we are going to need to mention some parameters for the async task. So for the moment we are going to mention all the three parameters as void, and later on in the course of making this application we are going to change it. Now even if we add in the parameters, this thing is still going to show us an error, and if we click on this it is going to ask us to implement methods. And the reason for that is that we have basically extended the background task to async task, and we actually need to implement some methods from this. So simply click on implement methods, and it is going to ask us to basically implement a method which is called as the do in background method. So simply click OK. And now as you could see, we have the method which is called as do in background. Now also we need to implement a few methods, or actually three methods inside this. So basically in order to implement these methods we actually don't need to type in manually. So in order to avoid typing all the things manually, we could simply press Alt, hold the Alt key and then hit the insert key. So when you hold the Alt key and hit the insert key, you will be prompted with this small, what you could say, window. And the next thing which you need to do is that you basically need to select override methods, and the methods which we are going to use from here are these three methods. So the very first method is the on post execute method, so make sure that you select this. Then the second method is going to be this method on pre-execute, and the final one is going to be on progress update. So make sure that you select these methods and simply hit OK. Now once you have these three methods, the next thing which you do is that you basically go ahead and create a brand new constructor. So basically in order to constructor, we go right over here, but even before creating a constructor we actually need to pass in the context. So we create a context, so we type context, let's name this thing as ctx, and now let's go ahead and create a constructor. So we type background task and basically pass in the context to the background task. So we type in context over here, context ctx, and inside it we are basically going to type this dot ctx equals ctx. Now if you don't understand why we have actually added this constructor, so simply hold on and you will be able to understand the usage of this in a few minutes. Now once we have the reference to it, the next thing which we do is that we are basically going to add in the code in these methods right over here. So basically we actually want to call these methods from the register.java. So simply go to register.java, and inside the register user method basically create a new string and call this string as, let's say, register. So we create a new string, so we type string, not strong, string equals string, and the name of this string is going to be method. So we type string method equals register, and basically we are going to create an object of the background task over here. So we type background task, and let's name it as background task equals new background task, and we are going to pass in this as a reference, and finally we are going to execute the method from the background task. So we type background task dot execute, and inside here we are going to pass in the method. So we type method over here. To this method we are going to pass in the 4 parameters, which is nothing but the name, password, contact and country. So we type name, password, contact and country. Okay, now once we have passed in these 3 parameters, it is actually going to show us an error, and the reason for this showing an error is that if we switch to the background task.java, as you could see, it has some different parameters over here. So the very first parameter here is void, and we actually need to change this parameter to string. So basically go here and change the first parameter to string. So now once it is changed, we also need to go into the do in background method. So this is the do in background method, and we also need to change this void to string. And as soon as we do it, as you could see, the error disappeared. Now the remaining code which we are going to type in the background task.java class is going to be inside the do in background method. So this do in background method is going to consist all of the code which is going to be performed in the background, so that we could basically use this code to insert values into the database. So the very first thing which we do is that we type in string method equals params of 0. So what this thing is going to do is that it is going to store the first parameter into the variable called string. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to check in if this method, the name of this method is equal to register. So if the name of this method is register, then in that case we actually need to perform the operation for the register method. So we type if method dot equals, and in double quotes we type in register. So in that case we want to perform the action which we are going to specify in here. Now also one more thing which we need to do is that we need to type in, or we need to create a string, and we need to call it URL or register URL. So we type in string reg underscore URL, and we actually need to mention the, what you could say, the actual path of the database on our local host. So by default path of my database is going to be http://10.0.2.2/ the name of the folder which is project, and the actual name of the file which actually contains the PHP script to register. So that is going to be /register.php. And in order to avoid confusion, let me just cross verify this URL. So I'm going to pause this video and I'm going to confirm if this thing is the exact URL. Okay, so I have basically cross verified, and this is the same exact link where the actual database lies. So we are good to go, and actually change this to reg, it has become rer. So basically the reason for using this URL or the string URL is to store the actual URL where the actual database lies, so that we could reference it to insert our values. Okay, now once we have this thing, the next thing which we do is that we again go inside this if, and we extract the other parameters. So we type string name equals params of 1, and actually the reason for typing in the first parameter is because the next parameter after the method name is going to be the name. So this is the 0th parameter, this is the first, second, third and fourth. So let's do this for the remaining parameters. So we type string, the next parameter is password. So we type string password equals params of 2. Then we type in string, and the next parameter is contact. So we type string contact equals params of 3, and the final one, or the final string, is going to be string country equals params of 4. So once we have all these parameters, the next thing which we do is that we basically go ahead and create the object of URL. So in order to create object of URL, we type URL, and let's name this object as URL. So we type URL equals new URL, and to this URL we are basically going to pass in the string URL which we have created. So simply pass in register URL, and as soon as we add it, we are going to basically get an error. So basically let's just click on it and click on this bulb right here, and it is going to ask us to surround this thing with a try catch block. So simply click this thing, and you will have your code surrounded with a try catch block so as to handle the exceptions with this. Now the next thing which we do is that, as we basically want to send this to a database, we actually need to create the object of the HTTP URL connection. So we type HTTP URL connection, and let's name this thing as HTTP URL connection equals, then we type in URL, then basically we typecast it with HTTP URL connection, then we type URL dot open connection. Now again this thing is going to give us an error, and it is the same error. We actually need to handle the exception related to this. So simply click on this bulb, and instead of just surrounding it with try catch, simply click on this option which says add catch clause. So once we have added the catch clause for this and handled its exception correctly, the error is basically going to disappear and we are good to go. So we go ahead and type in the next code. So once we have this, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to set the request method. So if you're familiar with basic networking, then you might be familiar that whenever we actually need to put in some values into the database, we actually use a post method. So we type in HTTP URL connection dot set request method, and what the set request method does is that it basically mentions the method which we are going to use so as to basically transfer the data. So the method is going to be post. So once we have set up this method, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to set do output to be true. So we type in HTTP URL connection dot set do output true. Now after this, to basically send the data, we need to create an object of an output stream. So we go ahead and type output stream. Let's name this thing as OS. We type this equals HTTP URL connection dot get output stream. So basically what this line of code does is that it basically creates the object of the output stream, and it is going to basically allow us to send the data in the stream. So once we have this, the next thing which we do is that we also use a buffered reader. So we create an object of buffered reader. So we type buffered writer, as we are writing the data, and buffered reader is used whenever we are trying to read the data. So as in this case, as we want to write the data to the database, so we type buffered writer, and let's name this object as buffered writer equals new buffered writer, and within this we basically type in new output stream writer, and to this we basically pass in the object of the output stream. So we type OS, give a comma, and basically we need to specify the encoding. So the encoding for this is going to be UTF-8. Okay, now once we have these things set up, the next thing which we need to do is that we basically need to create a string and encode all the data into a particular string, and we need to call that string as data. So once we have created the buffered writer, the next thing which we need to do is that we basically need to encode the data by using the URL encoder. So we will be doing that in the upcoming tutorial. So that's it for this tutorial, and as you could see in this tutorial, we have basically got through halfway for writing the code for our background task, so as to basically write the data into the database. So basically what we have done here is that we have created the background task.java. We have created the constructor for it. We have passed in the context to the constructor. Then we have created the URL and we have stored it in a string. And basically we have extracted the parameters from the register.java method. So basically we have created the object of the background task here, and we have passed in the method name, the 4 parameters which are the name, password, contact and country, and we have extracted them over here. And once we are done with this, the next thing which we did is that we have basically created the HTTP URL connection object so as to basically establish a connection. We have used the post method. We have set the do output to be true. Then we have created the output stream, and to basically write the data we have used the buffered writer. And in the next tutorial we'll be basically encoding the data and finally sending the data to the database. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be continuing with the code which we have left in the previous tutorial. So basically in the previous tutorial we have completed the code till the buffered writer. So buffered writer was basically used to write the data so that we could insert this data into the database. Now I've added the next line of code. So the reason for adding the next line of code directly is that while recording this I might encounter an error in while writing the syntax. So basically I am going to explain what I did here. So basically I have created a new string which is data, and the reason for creating this string is that we basically need to encode some information in this string. So basically we have used the URL encoder to basically encode the data. So I have typed URL encoder dot encode, and the first parameter which I have passed here is the name. Then the second parameter is the actual encoding format, and after this I have again passed in the name and the encoding format. So we have done this thing for the name, and I have just typed in the code for encoding the name, and we are going to type in the code for basically encoding everything else. So we also need to encode the password, contact and country. So I'm going to basically copy and paste the same thing 3 times so that we could basically encode the entire data. So after name, the next thing which we need to encode is going to be the password. So simply type in password here, and I misspelled password. Okay, and also change this name to password as well. Change this name to contact. Change this thing to contact. Change this name to country, and finally change this name to country. Okay, now once we are done with this, we are good to go. So we have basically encoded all the data and we have saved it all into the variable or into the string variable data. Now we could actually use the buffered writer to actually save the data or actually pass in the data to the database, and also make sure that at the end you simply need to delete this and add a semicolon over here. So now let's go ahead and write in the data to the buffered writer. So we go ahead and type in buffered writer dot write and simply pass in the data which we have. So this is basically data over here. So once we have passed in the data, we are good to go. Now we actually need to flush the buffered writer. So we type buffered writer dot flush. So this is basically going to flush the buffered writer, and finally we need to close the buffered writer. So we type buffered writer dot close. So once we have closed the buffered writer, we also need to close the output stream. So we type os dot close. So this method is basically going to close the buffered writer, and finally we actually need to return something over here. So we type return, and let's say this says registration success, and as soon as we add a return over here, it is going to show us an error, And the reason for that is basically when we go in the do in background, as you could see, the type of this method is void, so basically it is going to return nothing. So basically let's go ahead and change this to string, and what this thing does is that it basically allows us to return a string over here. And also we need to change this parameter to string so as to get rid of the error. So once we change this to string, as you could see, the error actually disappeared. And also we need to change this thing to string as well. So instead of a void, let's type in string, and instead of this a void, let's replace this to result, and also let's go ahead and replace this to result as well. So basically once all the methods are done, the code which we want to execute on basically executing everything lies in the post execute method. So this is a registration process through an Android application. So let's say after everything is completed successfully, we actually want to display a message via a toast like registration is successful. So in that case we also make a toast here. So we type toast dot make text and simply pass in the context to this toast. So we type ctx, then pass in the message which is result, then type in toast dot length long, and finally use a method called as show. Okay, so what we have done here is that we have basically created a toast which basically allows us to raise a toast when we actually are successful in inserting these values into the database. So once we are done with this, we are good to go. Now the only few things which are remaining is that we actually need to go inside the register.java, and actually we need to go right here inside the register user method, and we actually need to finish it. So we type finish. Okay, so once this is done, we are good to go. Now we actually need to go inside the manifest and grant permission to this application to use internet. So we type users permission android.permission.internet. Okay, so now once this thing is done, what we need to do is that we again need to go to the main activity, and as you might know, whenever we start the application, the first activity to start is going to be the main activity, and this is the main activity right here. And we basically need a method to switch from this thing to the register activity. So we are basically going to create a small button over here, and we are going to name it as register, or let's say go to register, and I think I made a mistake here. This is register. Okay, and basically we are going to go into properties, and to the on click of this we are going to add in a method name. So basically search for a property called on click. Okay, so to the on click of this we type in go to register, and I'm going to copy this thing, and after this we switch back to the main activities Java and create a method over here. So we type public void, name this thing as the on click, pass in the view. After passing the view, simply create a new intent over here so as to switch from one activity to other. So we type intent equals new intent, and basically to this intent the first parameter we pass is this, and the next parameter is going to be the name of the class to which we want to switch to. So that is nothing but register dot class. Now let's go ahead and use the start activity method so as to basically start the intent. So we type start activity and simply pass in the intent over here. So now once we are done with this, we are good to go. So we simply save the code, and what this thing is going to do is that whenever we go to the main activity and click this button, it is going to redirect us to this activity so that we could basically fill in these fields and hit this button so as to basically insert the values into the database. So now the only thing which remains is that we basically need to make changes to the files which are nothing but the register.php. So in order to make changes to the register.php, simply go into XAMPP, go to htdocs, and the name of our folder is project, and this is the file which is nothing but register.php. So I'm going to open this thing up in Atom, and I've actually already made the changes to this file. So if we open it, you will be able to find the changes which we have made, and I'm also going to explain what all changes we have made to this file. So as you could see, these are the changes which I have made to the file. So the very first thing which I have done here is that I have basically used the same script, but the only changes which I have made is that instead of using the what you could say ready-made variables, so right here we had a line like let's say dollar password equals, and we might have a password like ashu123. so this was the line of code which was present initially. Now what I have done is that I have simply changed the variable names a little bit, and basically instead of the actual values of the variables, I have put a post over here. So make sure that you make the relevant changes in your PHP script, and also you need to comment out the echo statements in this file which is register.php as well as in the init.php. so make sure that you do the relevant changes, and once you are done with this, we are basically good to go. So simply save this file, and finally we can run our Android application. So basically when I tried to run this application, I actually was not able to insert values into the database, and the reason is that I almost forgot to add a line of code which is to basically get the input stream. So I finally added this line of code right here, and let's see now if the application actually works. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make this source code of the entire application available to you, so that even if you face an error, you could simply copy the code and you could actually use in the code so as to basically run this application. So now let's go ahead and save the application. So even before trying to run this application, we actually need to start the servers. So make sure that on the XAMPP control panel, the Apache and MySQL is actually started. Now once this is started, to make sure that the server is up and running, simply open up Mozilla and just type in localhost. So we type in localhost, and yeah, as you could see, our server is up and running. So now let's go ahead and run this application on the emulator. So as you could see, the application is up and running on the emulator. So when we hit this button right here which says go to register, we'll be prompted with this thing right here. Now let's insert some random stuff into it. So let's say the first thing is Apple. Let's say the second one is, let's say AAA. Let's say this is RRR, and let's say this is EE and E. So we just insert some random data to check if this thing works and hit insert. So as you could see, it displayed a toast which says registration success. Now actually we have created a table for users, but to test it if this thing actually works, we have just entered random data into it. Now we actually got the confirmation as registration was successful, but in order to actually check if the registration was successful, we open up localhost. So open up the web browser and simply go to localhost, go to phpMyAdmin, and go to the project database, which is our database, and inside there we have a table called users. So as you could see, the last row, it says Apple, AAA, RRR and EEE. So basically we are successful in inserting the values into the database, which is nothing but the local database. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how to basically insert values into the database. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to talk about how to connect our Android application to an online database. So in the previous tutorial we have created an Android application, and basically what we did is that instead of connecting the Android application to an online database, what we have done is that we have basically connected it with a database which lies on our local host. Now the main problem with that is that it is okay if we
actually want to test our Android application while developing it, we could actually connect it to a local host. But when you actually want to launch your application so that public could use it, so in that case what we need to do is that instead of storing the data on the local host, we actually need to store in the data of our Android application onto the online server. Now the next thing which we need to learn is that how to basically set up an online server. And the thing is that we actually don't need to set up an online server. We could actually rent a online server. So basically, in order to get hosting so that you could basically host your data or you could host your database, what we actually need to do is that we actually need to buy in web hosting. So if we simply go to Google and if we simply type in like buy web hosting and hit enter, you will see multiple options over here to basically buy web hostings, and they are actually very cheap. So basically, as long as you don't need to save much data for your Android application, you are good to go. Now for the sake of this tutorial, what we are going to do is that as we are basically developing Android applications for just basically learning purposes, instead of buying a web hosting, what we could do is that we could basically use something which is called as free web hosting. So we simply type in free web hosting, and there are actually multiple options available in the free web hosting range. But what you could do is that you could simply select this, which is 000webhost.com. So this website actually provides us free web hosting which includes PHP and MySQL. So that's exactly what we need for our Android application at the moment. So basically you could go with this option right here, or there are also many other options available and you could choose accordingly. But what I would recommend is that you go with this thing right here. Now the another reason for using an online database even for learning purposes is that whenever we actually develop Android applications which are connected to a database, like if you host your database on your local server, then what you need to do is that you could actually run the applications only on the emulator. So basically, if you have connected your device to your PC so as to basically debug or run your Android applications, so in that case we actually cannot use localhost, and I found certain problems by using localhost on an actual device. So basically, if you want to run your Android database application on an actual device, it is better to go with the online database. And also this free web hosting which I have recommended is basically only for learning purposes, and they are actually not that much reliable. So make sure that if you are developing an original application like where you need to host your data on a database, so I would recommend you to buy a web hosting rather than going for a free one. And also the free web hosting has many disadvantages, but if you simply cannot afford to buy a web hosting just for learning purposes, then go with this. And also the paid web hosting offers much better user experience in terms of basically handling the backend. So basically it has much better UI to basically create a database, add in your files and all that kinds of things. So if you could basically buy a web hosting, then simply go for that. Or if you couldn't, so simply switch to this 000 web host. So it basically allows us to create our account and it is going to assign us a domain name. So this is my domain name right here. So if I open it up, it is going to redirect me to this page, and I have modified this page a little bit. So this is the home page of our website. Now the next thing which we need to do is that after creating an account, we actually need to set up the database into this domain. So simply go to cPanel. So this is basically the admin area for our website. Now in here we'll have multiple options. So what we want to do is that we want to actually select the option which is called as phpMyAdmin, which is under database, and that is because we are currently dealing with databases. So simply select this, and after doing that, what you could do is that you could basically create a MySQL database, and I have already created 2 databases here. So I'm going to select the second database, and actually the steps for creating database are quite simple. So you could basically create in the database, and after creating a database, when you select it, you will get this thing right here, which is basically similar to what we were getting in a local host. So this is the admin area for managing our databases. Now we could create a database here. So let's go ahead and create a database called as, let's say, users, and let's say the number of fields in users are 4. So simply type this information in and hit go. Now as you could see, we are prompted with a new window which basically is asking us to enter the name of the fields and basically all the values inside the fields. Sorry, not the values, the actual type of the field and then the actual length of the field. So let's go ahead and enter some random fields. So let's say we want to store the name, and let's say we want to store the email, contact, and let's say password. So let's say we have these 4 fields which we want to basically store. Now the next thing which we do is that we assign a type to it. So basically let's assume that we actually want to what you could say save text here, and now let's say the values are 30, 30 and 30. So once we are done with this, we simply click save and this should create a new database for us. So once we have created the table, this is what we get. So this is basically the table which has 4 fields: name, email, contact and password, and this is pretty much the same thing which we have done in the previous tutorials. But the thing is that we have done this thing in an online database, and I just wanted to show you that this is very much similar to what we have done on the local host. The only thing is that the admin panel for this has a little bit different theme. So once this thing is set up, the next thing which we do is that we actually need to try to establish a connection to this online database. So basically, in order to set up a connection, what we need to do is that we need to write in a PHP script to basically set up a connection to this thing right here. So actually, even before setting up the connection, we are going to need some information related to our database. Now the information which we actually need is going to be the host name, the database name, the username and password, and also we'll require a domain name for our website. You can actually purchase a domain name, but if you actually want a free domain name, then this free hosting site actually provides us with a free domain name as well. So we actually need to extract these 4, or you could say 5 parameters even before trying to establish a connection, and the reason for that is that these parameters are actually needed to define to basically tell the server so as to basically which database we are going to connect to. So we could easily get this information. So for example, if we switch to this panel right here, as you could see, it is telling us that the server is basically the local host. So basically what this thing means is that the host name is localhost, and even if this is not a local host, it is named as localhost. So make sure that you add this name over there, and in your case it might be something different, but in most of the cases it is localhost. Now it has also assigned me a database name, so which is this, and actually if we have a look at here, this thing right here is nothing but the database name. And now for the SQL user and password, this is basically the username and password, and this username and password are basically different from your login and password, which basically allows us to open an account in this website. So basically this login and password are basically the login and password of a user which has an access to basically database. So these login and passwords will be provided to you when you sign up for this thing right here in your email. So basically if you check your email, you will be having these 2 passwords to basically access the database. So remember that these passwords are different from the login credentials of the website. So make sure that you have all these info even before you start writing a script so as to basically connecting to a database. So once we have this info, we are basically good to go. So we could simply write in the PHP script for establishing connection. So we type in PHP, and let's go ahead and save this file as connect.php, and I'm going to save it on desktop. So simply save this thing and select the file type as all types and simply click save. And now we could type in the code so as to basically establish the connection. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create 4 variables: host, database, user, and password. So I'm going to type in $host equals, I'm going to leave it empty, and later on I'm going to copy the things from here. Then I'm going to type in $database equals, then the next parameter is the username, so we type $username equals, and finally $password. So once we have these things, let's simply go ahead and copy these things into this PHP file. So basically I'm going to copy all these things. Okay, now once we have these 4 fields set up, the next thing which we could do is that we could basically write in the query so as to basically establish a connection. So we type $con equals mysqli underscore connect, and in there we could simply specify the parameters. So the very first parameter is going to be the host name, so we type $host. Then the second parameter is the username, so we type $username. Then the third parameter is going to be the password, so we type $password. And the final thing which we are going to type in is going to be the database name, so we type $database. Okay, so once we are done with this, we are good to go. Now the only thing which we need to do is that we need to execute this query and check if it is successful. So we type if not con, and what this thing means is that we are basically not connected to a database, so we want to echo connection. This is wrong, actually this should be, so we type connection unsuccessful, and else if it is false, so we actually want to echo connection successful. So I'm going to simply copy this statement and I'm going to simply paste it over here and just simply change this thing to successful. Okay, now once this thing is done, we are basically good to go. So now what we need to do is that we actually want to copy the contents of these file, and we actually want to put these contents into the actual server. So if we open up this admin panel, what you could do is that you could simply go back, and here we actually want to search for the file manager. So this is the file manager right here, so simply open your file manager, hit continue, and actually for accessing a file manager we will be having a different username and password, and the details or the username and password are actually going to be provided when you get an email from this 000 web host. So make sure to check your email, and you will be having details to basically set up the so to basically access the file manager. And also one more thing which I would like to point out is that whenever we are using free web hosting services, so in that case what might happen is that sometimes the servers are actually down and we cannot actually have an access to the file manager. So if you are not able to access file manager, so wait for a little bit of time and basically try again. And if you don't want to wait, then my best advice would be go for a paid web hosting. It offers much better service at a lower price. So simply click continue and you will be redirected to your file manager. Now in this file manager, we actually want to go to this public_html folder, and all the files which are basically accessible to public are actually present over here. So we simply need to go here, and remember, please do not upload anything over here. So these files are actually reserved, and actually we have a special folder which is called as public_html, so as to basically upload our files. So simply click this thing, and here we could actually go ahead and create multiple files. So let's go ahead and create a new file. So select this option which says new file, and let's name this thing as init.php, and we are going to basically type in the PHP code over here. So once we are done with this, we basically save the code, and in order to check it if this thing performs correctly, what we do is that we go back, and actually now we need the domain name. So my domain name is this, So yours might be a little bit different. So the only thing which you need to do is that copy your domain name and paste it over here and give a slash and type in init.php and hit enter. And I think I have an error over there in my PHP script, so I'm going to simply check it. Where's my error? And now let's go ahead and check where our actual error lies, and there it is. So basically I have missed a semicolon over here. So once we have added the semicolon, simply hit save, and again you could simply refresh this page. Okay, so I was not able to basically connect to the server, and actually what I did is that when I checked into my email, as you could see for the MySQL while using PHP, it has asked us to basically change the host to this thing right here. So this is my host name. So what I did is that when I simply replaced this thing with instead of localhost, what I did is that I've typed in the host name which is provided by the web host. So when I replace this and when I saved the code and when I return back to this page and when I hit refresh, it actually showed me connection successful. So make sure that you actually extract the proper details for your database, or else you are going to have an error creating or error to actually connecting to the database. So once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. Now the next thing which we do is that we create a simple HTML form to basically try to check if we could insert some values into the database. So basically we are also going to write in the PHP script so as to basically insert values into the database, and to check if that PHP script actually performs, we are going to design a simple HTML form to insert values into the database. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be writing the PHP script so as to basically insert values into the online database and check if we could actually perform the database insertion operation. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be finally writing the script so as to basically insert values into our online database, and also we are going to basically create a simple HTML form to basically allow us to enter the values so that we could actually check if the values can actually be inserted into the online database. So the main reason for basically creating the HTML form instead of directly connecting the database to the Android application is to basically check if we are actually able to perform the data insertion operation. Now what happens if you basically try to connect an Android application to the database is that if you have an error, so you won't be able to recognize where the actual error lies. So in that case, what you need to do is that you need to check over two things. So the very first thing you need to check if the error occurs is that you actually need to check where the actual error lies. So you will be pretty much confused if you try to do this on the first attempt. So it is always better to basically test the database by creating simple HTML forms. And also if you are basically trying to develop a database for your Android application, you could also use the same database for your website. So let's say you are developing some application, so what you could do is that you could not only create an Android application for it, but you could also host the application as a web page on your website. So that's the basic advantage of basically creating a form. It actually saves much time while basically testing out things. So now without wasting any time, let's directly go ahead and basically write in a PHP script to insert data into the database. So the very first thing which we do is that we create a new file. So let's go ahead and type in PHP and let's go ahead and save the file. So save this thing as insert.php, save it on the desktop. So once this is done, we are good to go. Now let's go ahead and type in the very first line of code. So the very first thing which we do is that, so the very first line of code which we are going to write is require. So we type in require, and in it we are going to type in the script which we actually want to execute even before executing it, and that script is nothing but init.php. So we type init.php, and this script is nothing but this script which is saved as connect.php, but the file name of this script is init.php on the server. So make sure that you include this init.php. So once we are done with this, the next thing which we do is that we basically declare the variables. Now if we switch back to the database, which is nothing but this, as you could see, these are the names for the fields. So first we have name, then we have email, then we have contact, and then we have password. So let's go ahead and declare variables for it. So we type $name equals, and after the variable name we initialize it to $_ post, and in there we basically type in the actual name. So the name for the field is nothing but name, so we type in name here. And what we do is that we do the same thing for the rest of the fields, which are nothing but the email, contact, and passwords. So now I'm going to copy this line of code and I'm going to paste it 3 more times, and simply change this thing to email, this thing to email as well, this thing to contact, this thing to contact, and the final one to password. Okay, now once this thing is done, the next thing which we need to do is that we basically need to type in the SQL query so as to execute the insert query. So we type $SQL equals insert, this should be insert into, then after this we actually need to type in the table name. So the name of our table is users, so we type users, and after this we type in values, and after this we type in the actual values. So the very first value which we actually want to insert there is name, so we type $name. Then we have the email, so we type $email. Then we have the contact, so we type $contact, and after this we have the password at the end, so we type $password. And make sure that you type these things correctly, or else you are going to get an error. And after this simply give a semicolon, and make sure that you include this thing into double quotes, and also after the double quotes make sure to add a semicolon at the end as well. So this is the complete query which we have. Now the only thing which we need to do is that we actually need to execute this query. So we type if, and to this if we actually pass in MySQLi query, and to this we basically pass in the connection variable. Now the connection variable is basically from this thing, so make sure that you name the connection variable as this which we have mentioned here, and simply pass in the connection variable. So we type $con, then give a comma and simply specify the SQL query. So we type $SQL, and once we are done with this we are basically good to go. So on executing this query, if we get a positive result, so we need to mention the message as values added, or else we actually want to mention the message as values not added. So we go back here, type in else echo values not added. So once we are done with this we are basically good to go. So we simply save the code, and we actually need to copy this code onto the server. So I'm going to simply copy this, again go back to the file manager, hit continue, go back to the public_HTML, and we basically need to create a new file here. So I'm going to hit this button which is called as new file. So delete the code which is already present there and simply paste our code over there. So now once we are done with this, we name this file as, let's say, add.php for basically adding the contents into the database. So once we have named this thing, the next thing which we do is that we hit save. So once we are done with this we are basically good to go. Now the only thing which remains is that we basically need to add in a form to the web page so that we could actually insert values. So now let's go ahead and type in a HTML script so as to basically create a form which basically allows us to insert values. So you might be familiar with the basic HTML tags. So the very first tag which we use is the HTML tag to define that this is a HTML. And also let's go ahead and save this file as, let's say, demo.html, save it onto the desktop and save it in the form of all types. Now let's go ahead and add in head and body to it, and let's type in the body, And inside the body, let's go ahead and create a form. So if you're not aware how to create a form, this is how we create a form in HTML. So we type form, then we type action, so as to mention what action we need to perform on this form. So basically the action which we want to perform is going to be the PHP script. So we type in here add.php. After this, we actually need to mention the method. So the method of this form is going to be post. So we type method equals, and inside the method just specify the method as post. Now basically end the form tag. So we type form, and basically the form ends here. And inside the form, to basically format everything in a proper fashion, we go ahead and create a table. So we type table, and inside the table we want to create rows and columns. So we first create a row. So let's type in tr, close the tr tag, and inside the row we actually need a column. So we type td/td, and let's say we name this thing as name, as name is our first field. And after this, we actually need to mention the input type in the next row. So basically we want a text box so as to basically get the input from the user. So again we create td, so we type td/td, and in there, in between these two tags, we specify the input type. So we type input type equals, and we actually want to extract text. So we type input type text, and let's name this input as name. So we type name equals in double quotes name. Okay, so now once we have this row, what we need to do is that we need to create similar rows for other three fields. So I'm going to simply copy this thing and I'm going to paste it thrice. So the second field is going to be for the email. So let's replace this thing by email, also replace this one by email. Then the next thing which we do is that for the third field we change this to contact, change this thing to contact as well, and actually mention this in small letters. And the final one is password, so replace this by password and replace this thing by password. Okay, so now once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. Now the only thing which remains in this case is that we basically need to add in a button so as to basically submit the values. So we type in input type equals, and basically for the submit button we type input type as submit, and the value is going to be the value which we want to basically represent or which we want to display on the button. So we type submit over here as well. So once we are done with this, let's go ahead and save the code, and let's go ahead and copy this code and paste it onto the server. So again we go back to the control panel, then we go to the file manager, continue, go to public_HTML, and this time we are going to upload a HTML file. So hit new file and basically replace this text with the code which we have just created. Now let's name this file as insert.html. So once we have it, simply hit save. Okay, now once we are done with this, what we could do is that in order to access this file, we go ahead and we type in the domain name, which is nothing but this thing right here. So even if we click this, so this is our domain name right here, and in this we have a file which is called as insert.html. So we type in insert.html, and when we hit enter, we will be presented with a form right here. So basically when I tried to run this form on the browser, what happened is that I actually got an error, and the reason for error was that I made a simple mistake in this form right here. So this was basically like add p.php, and that's why the form was actually getting an error. So when I resolved this issue and I changed this back to add.php, and when I basically went and opened up the form, so the name of the form is insert.html. So now let's go ahead and try to insert the data once again. So let's say the name is demo, let's say the email is demo@gmail.com, let's say the contact is 123456, let's say the password is 98765, and when we hit submit, it is actually going to show us this page which says connection successful and values inserted. So in order to check if the values are actually inserted, what we could do is that we could simply go to the PHP myadmin. So this is the PHP myadmin area. So inside it, we actually select the table which is nothing but users, and it is going to ask us the password. And sometimes it is quite difficult to basically log in into this thing, and the reason for that is, as it is a free hosting, it might have some bugs. So again, if we go to the browse section, as you could see, these are the values which we have added right now. So basically we have demo@gmail.com, then again we have the contact, and we have the password as well. So basically we are successful in setting up the, what you could say, database, and basically connecting to the database as well as adding values into the database. Now our main goal is to basically connect this database with our Android application, so that we could basically enter data into the database by simply using our Android device. So basically, if your Android device has an internet connection, what we could do is that we could basically send data from your Android device to the online server. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be actually connecting, or we'll be creating a brand new Android application, and basically we are going to connect our Android application to the online server. And then instead of simply inserting the data from this form right here, what we are going to do is that we are going to create all these 4 fields into our Android application, and we are going to pass in these values from the actual Android application, so that the values actually get stored in the database, which is nothing but the online database. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to learn how to basically connect our Android application to the database. So in this tutorial we'll be creating a brand new Android application, and we are going to try to connect that application with this database, which is the online database which we have hosted on a free server. So in the previous tutorial we have created the database, we have created the table inside a database which is called as users, and this users actually has 4 fields. So the first field was name, the second one was email, then we had contact, and then we basically had password. And what we have done is that in order to test if this thing performs correctly, we have also created a new, what you could say, HTML form, so as to insert the data. And whenever we try to insert the data in here, it actually got reflected into the database. Now what this means is that our PHP scripts are working perfectly. Now what we could do is that we could use those same PHP scripts, but this time instead of using this form right here, we are going to use Android, and we are basically going to create a simple application so as to basically have these 4 fields and a button, and whenever we hit this button, our data should be submitted to the database. So now let's go ahead and start creating our Android application. So I'm going to just close these things, and now let's open up Android Studio and start a new Android Studio project. And let's name this thing as online app, then hit next. Select the API level as 15, hit next, select a blank activity, and let the name of your main activity be main activity, and finally click finish. So as you could see, this is our main activity right here. Now let's go ahead and make some changes to the main activity. So the very first thing which we do is that we basically remove the elements which we don't need. So I'm going to remove these things. And once these things are removed, we again switch back to the main activity, and here we are going to add a new button which basically is going to redirect us to a new activity. And also let's just remove this hello world, and let's name this thing as insert data, and we are going to basically add in an on-click method to this. So let's say this says ins data, which stands for insert data. Now let's go ahead and create a method in main activity which says ins data, but even before that, let's go ahead and create a brand new method to basically insert the data. So let's go to Java. Let's go to this folder right here. And let's create a new activity, and let's select the blank activity and let's name it as insert, then hit finish. And now what we are basically going to do is that we are going to switch to this new activity, which is nothing but insert.java from the main activity. Now in order to do so, first we go ahead and check the onClick method of this, which is nothing but ins data. So simply copy this method name, return back to main activity, and just type in public void the method name, and inside the parameters just pass in view, and after this we simply create an intent here. So we type in intent equals new intent, and to this we basically pass in this, and then we pass in the second parameter as the name of the second activity, which is insert. So we type insert dot class. Now to start this activity we type in start, this should be start activity, and simply pass in the intent which we have created. So we type in intent over here. Okay, now once we are done with this, we are pretty much good to go. So we simply save the code, and then we switch back to the insert.java, which is nothing but what you could say the activity which we'll be dealing with. Now the thing is that we have already created an Android application to basically connect with the localhost database. So instead of just typing in the code, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to simply pause the video over there, and I'm going to basically paste the source code for this, and all the things which we will be adding to this are already explained in the previous tutorial of connecting the database with a local host. Now the only difference is that in this application we are going to make a few changes so as to basically configure this application to connect with the online database. So I'm going to pause this video, I'm going to make a few changes here, and I'm also going to explain what I have changed, what things we are going to change in order to basically connect to an online database. So this is basically what we get while we paste the contents of the previous database application into the new one. So these are the contents of the register.java, which in this case is going to be insert.java. So when I copy and paste this, we will have a few errors, and the reason for that is basically the name of the edit text and all those kinds of things are different. So what I have done is that in the content insert.xml I have added 4 edit text, and I have named the ID as name, email, contact and password respectively. Now the only thing which we need to do is that we actually need to reference those over here. So I have basically created edit text e_name, e_email, e_contact and e_password, and I have also declared the strings so as to basically save the info related to this. Now we also need to make a few changes here. So the second field right here is going to be basically email. So in order to avoid confusion, let's replace this by email and use the same order everywhere so that we don't miss out on anything. So this is going to be contact, and the final one is going to be password. So we type e_password and change this thing to password, and also we make changes over here. So this is name, the second one we want is going to be email, so make sure that you replace this with email. So this is going to be e_email. The third one is contact, and the final one is actually going to be password. So we type in password over here and e_password over here, and also we make relevant changes over here. So this is going to be name, email, contact and password. And also, as you could see, this thing right here is showing us an error, and that is because we have not yet created the background task. So let's go ahead and create a new Java class which is called as background task. So simply go over here and create a new Java class, and let's name it as background task. And if you have any difficulty in basically typing in the source code for this application, then you don't need to worry. I am going to basically post the source code of this application so that you could simply use this into your application. Now we already have the background task completed in this application. So what we are going to do here is that we are going to simply switch to the previous background task, and we are going to basically copy the things over here and make modifications to this. And the reason for that is that there is no point in typing these things again. So we simply copy these things, return back over here, and replace this one with the background task of the previous application. And it is going to ask us to import a few things, and simply click OK. Okay, now once we have the background task, we also need to make a few changes to the background task of our application. So the very first thing which we do is that we check line by line if we are correct. Now this thing right here is a constructor, and this is basically the same as the previous one, but in the do in background method we actually need to change the URL of this thing. So the registration URL, or the URL for basically inserting data, was this thing right here. Now in our case the URL is a little bit different. So basically in order to check the URL, we basically go to 000 web host, and basically we are going to log in over here. So go to members area and go to cPanel, go to the file manager so as to check the URL. So simply open up file manager, hit continue, and inside the public underscore HTML folder, so this is the script. So simply view the script in order to confirm, and yeah, name, email, contact and password. So this is the script which we are looking for. So it is basically named as add.php. So if we simply type in the domain name, and after this if we give a slash and type in add.php and hit enter, so this is basically the script which we have. So we simply copy this, return back to Android Studio, and we are basically going to paste this thing over here. Okay, now once we have added this thing, the next thing which we do is that we change the other parameters. So the string here is going to be email, this is going to be contact, and this thing is going to be password. So make sure that you do the relevant changes. And after this thing is okay, this code is also fine. And now also we need to make changes over here. So the second field is going to be for the email. So type in email here and email here as well. And for the final one, replace this by password and replace this thing by password as well. Rest of the things are going to be same. So now as you could see, our code is completely error free. So in the next tutorial we are basically going to try to run this application on the emulator, or we could also run this application on an actual device. So basically we will test this application on an actual device to see if it works. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be finally running this application onto our device so as to basically check if this application is able to insert the data into the online database. So the very first thing which I would like to mention is that if you are finding it difficult to write the code for this application, even after you refer to the previous tutorial of adding the data into localhost, then what I am going to do is that I am going to add in the source code for this application in either this lecture or another lecture. So make sure that you copy the contents of that and use the code in order to basically insert data into the database in order to basically get a reference. And you could also use this code so as to make the database insertion operation. And also one more thing which we need to do is that, as this content insert.xml is basically the file which is basically used to insert the data, so to the on click of this button we need to type in the method which is register user, which we have used in the previous tutorial. And also in the manifest you need to basically set the permission to access internet, and if you don't set this thing then you are going to face an error. So make sure that you do those things. Now we are going to simply save the code and we are going to run this application and check if this application performs correctly. So this is what I get. So if we hit insert and let's go ahead and type in some values like Ashu demo as the name, then we type email as Ashu toshpawar08@gmail.com. then let's type the next value of contact as some random number, and let's say we type in the password. And now when we hit this button right here, as you could see, it displayed as registration success. Now let's basically go ahead and check if the values are actually inserted into the database. So I've already opened up the database over here, and currently these are the values in the database. Now in order to check our value, we are going to simply hit browse again or simply refresh this page, and as you could see, the values are inserted over here. So this is the name, this is the email, this is the contact, and this thing right here is the password. So that's basically how you insert values into a database by using your Android application. So in the next tutorial, we are going to learn about JSON and how to basically retrieve values from the database. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are basically going to learn about JSON. So the reason why we are trying to learn about JSON is that we have already learned how to basically insert values into the database, and basically we were successful in doing so. Now the next step would be basically how to retrieve the values from the database so that we could actually display those values on the Android application. So even before doing that, what we need to do is that we basically need to learn something which is called as JSON. So basically JSON, which is JSON, actually stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So you might think that, okay, what is JSON? So you might have learned JSON previously, or you might not be aware of JSON. So JSON is basically what you could say a data interchange mechanism which is most commonly used in Android applications. So actually we don't need to go into much depth into learning JSON. So even if we know the basics of the JSON, we could basically use JSON to basically get the data and pass the data. So basically this is what the JSON looks like. So the JSON actually consists of two parts. So the first part is actually called as the object, and the next part is actually called as an array. So for example, this is a JSON right here. So here in this case, this thing right here is an object. So basically this curly bracket right here represents an object, and this square bracket right here represents an array. So for example, this thing right here is nothing but the object 1, this thing right here is an object 2, and this thing right here is an object 3. So basically each JSON object actually represents a name value pair. So for example, this thing right here is the name, and this is the value of that particular name. So this thing, or this entire thing, is a name value pair. In a similar fashion, this thing right here, which is email, is a name. This thing right here is nothing but the value of the email, that is nothing but the value of the name. So the entire thing is a name value pair. So basically in JSON, each object is represented as a name value pair. So that's basically what we need to actually understand about JSON. So now what we are going to do is that we are going to write in a PHP script which basically allows us to extract data from the database so that we could actually display that data using JSON in our Android application. So let's go ahead and write a PHP script so as to retrieve data. So let's go ahead and select a new file, and let's type in PHP. Now let's go ahead and save the file in the PHP format. So let's say we name it as getJSON.php, and I'm going to save this thing on a desktop, and later on we are going to actually transfer this file to the server. Okay, so now once we have the PHP script, we go ahead and type in the host name, the username, the password, and the database name. So I basically have the server details right over here. So basically these are my server details. So I have simply copied it from the file and I've pasted it over here. So after we have these details, let's go ahead and write in a query so as to basically extract elements from a database. So basically whenever you want to extract values from a table, we write a query which is called as select star from table name. So let's go ahead and formulate that query. So let's type in $SQL equals, and in there we type in select star from, and now let's go ahead and check from which table we actually want to extract these values. So we enter into PHP myadmin and we basically want the values from the table which is called as users. So we switch back to the script and we type in select star from users. So what this line of code is going to do is that it is basically going to select all values. So basically in SQL, star means all. So we basically actually want to select all the fields from the table which is users. So again, give a semicolon here and a semicolon here and our query is done. Now let's go ahead and establish a connection. So we type $con equals mysql I underscore connect. And basically let's go ahead and establish a connection by passing in the host name, the username, the password and the database name. So let's first pass in the host name. So we type $host, then we type in $username, then we type in $password, and finally we type in the database name. So these are the parameters which are required to establish a connection. So after this, what we do is that we already have the SQL query. Now we save. Now we actually need to execute this SQL query and we actually need to save the result which is returned by this. So this query is a little bit different from the previous query. So the previous query used to be a query wherein you write a query and it used to basically insert values. Now in this case, instead of inserting values, we are going to retrieve values. So basically for when the values are retrieved, we actually need a variable to save these values. So we store the entire result into a variable called result. So we type $result equals, and then we type in the code to execute the query. So we type mysqli underscore array, and to this we simply pass in the connection variable which is $con, and then we pass in the SQL query. So we type in $SQL. So now once we are done with this, we are good to go. So the next line of code which we write is we type in $response equals array, and after this we basically write a for loop so that we could loop through the entire result. So we type in while. So let's go ahead here and type in while, and then let's just type in $row equals mysqli underscore fetch array. So what this line of code is going to do is that it is going to basically fetch the array from the result. So to this we actually need to pass in the result variable. So we type in $result. Okay, so once we have typed this in, let's go ahead and type in the code inside the while. So we type in array underscore push, and to this we pass in the response array. So we type $response, then we give a comma, then we actually pass in the array. So we type array, and to this we basically add in parameters, and in the parameters we basically pass in the actual fields and then we specify the actual value. So basically what we do here is that we basically represent a name value pair in a JSON. So basically the very first thing or the very first field in our database is name. So we type name, give a equal sign, give a greater than sign, and after this just specify the first row. So we type in $row. So the first row is the 0th row, so specify the index as 0, then give a comma and do the same thing for the second field. So if we have a look at our table which is called as users, and if we open this thing up, The second field is email, then we have contact, and then we have password. So let's go ahead and do the same for email, contact, and password. So we type email equals greater than $, and this time specify the index as 1, give a comma. Do the same for contact. So we type contact equals greater than $, specify the index as 2, again give a comma, and for the final one, which is nothing but password, we type password equals to greater than $, and just pass in the index as 3. So now once we are done with this, we basically go right here, right below the while. So we basically exit out of the while loop and just echo the JSON array. So we type echo, then we type in JSON underscore encode. So we basically encode this entire thing. So basically we type in the array name. So we type array, and to this we basically pass in the name as server response, and then finally give a semicolon to end the statement, and also make sure that you have specified a semicolon at the end of this line right here. So let's basically check if we have specified it, and no. So basically make sure that you specify the semicolon at the end, or else you are going to get an error. Okay, so once this thing is done, let's go ahead and let's basically close the connection, and also after this we type in this is equal to greater than, and finally for the server response we type in $response. So once basically this is done, we go ahead and close the connection. So in order to close the connection, we type in mysqli underscore close, and to this we basically pass in the connection variable. So we type $con. So this thing right here is basically going to close the connection. Okay, now once we are done with this, we simply copy the entire code and go back to the file manager. So let's go ahead and open up the file manager, and in the file manager we are basically going to go to the public underscore HTML folder, and we are basically going to upload this new script. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and let's name this file as json getData.php. Now we are going to paste the code here. Okay, now once we have the code pasted, let's go ahead and save this file, and basically now we have the file at json getData.php. Now the URL of our website is this thing. So if we type this thing in and give a slash and just type in json getData.php and hit enter, we actually have an error on the line number 11. So let's go ahead and check where the actual error lies. Okay, so I got my error. So this thing should actually be query, and I don't know why I typed this thing as an array. So okay, so once we replace this thing with query, let's go ahead and copy the code, and let's basically go ahead and replace this thing with a new code. And now let's go ahead and save the file, and let's refresh this thing once again. Okay, so we have basically retrieved the data from the database, but as you could notice, the data is actually not well formatted, so we actually cannot cross verify data is correct. So in order to basically get this thing in a better format, what we do is that we search for something which is called as JSON lint. So we type JSON lint, hit enter, and the first link is which pops up is basically the validator for JSON. So JSON lint is a web-based validator and reformatter for JSON. So simply open this thing up, and here what we need to do is that we basically need to pass in this URL, which is nothing but the PHP script where our actual JSON lies. So if we pass this thing in, we have a button here which says validate JSON. So if we click this button, it is basically going to display the JSON in a proper format. So this is basically the data which is retrieved from the database. So basically we have the data in the JSON format. So now what we could do is that we could actually go ahead and create an Android application so as to basically retrieve the data in a JSON format. So after retrieving the data, we are basically going to convert this data, or what you could say is that we could actually parse this data and arrange it in a proper format so that it could be actually displayed in the Android application. So that's it for this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are basically going to create a brand new Android Studio project so as to create a JSON application which basically fetches the data from the database. That is nothing but it fetches the JSON. So basically we are going to get the JSON into our Android application, and then we are basically going to convert it, or we are basically going to parse the JSON and we are going to represent it in a proper format. So let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. So let's create a brand new Android Studio project, and let's name this thing as, let's say, new JSON project. Click next. Select the API level as 15. Click next, and go ahead and select a blank activity and click next, and finally click finish. Okay, so once we have the Android Studio project set up, the next thing which we do is that we design the user interface for our main activity. So the very first thing which we do is that we delete this hello world and we add in two buttons over here. So go ahead and drag two buttons right over here, and now let's go ahead and also add a plain text view right over here. Now let's change the name of these buttons, and basically what we are going to do in this application is that we are basically simply going to what you could say extract values from the database. So that is going to be the JSON. So basically we are going to name the first button as get JSON, and whenever we hit this button we actually will be able to retrieve the JSON data from the database, and the second button is actually going to be called as parse JSON. So parsing JSON, and actually let me name this thing correctly. So parse JSON is basically going to parse the JSON, and what I mean by parsing the JSON is that representing the JSON in a proper format. Okay, so once we have set up these buttons, let's go ahead and set the onClick method of these two buttons. So let's select the first one, go to properties and search for a property which is called as onClick. Okay, so to the onClick of this we pass in let's say get JSON, and for the parse JSON we are going to name this as parse JSON. Okay, so once we have these two buttons set up, let's go ahead and type in the further code so as to basically extract the values from the database. So the very first thing which we do is that we define the get JSON method. So even before doing that, what we do is that we go inside the manifest and basically set up the permission to basically allow this application to use internet. So we type in uses permission, and this is going to be internet. So we simply set up the internet permission so that our application is will actually be able to access the internet. And also we are basically going to go into main activity and remove the toolbar and all those kinds of stuff which we actually don't need. So I'm going to simply remove this, and I'm also going to remove this as well. Okay, now once we have removed this, let's go ahead and define the get JSON method here. So we type public void get JSON. To this we simply pass in view, and in this we are basically going to write in the code which we want to perform when we click the get JSON button. Now after this, what we do is that we create a new class for the background task over here. So what this is going to do is that it is going to contain the code which is going to get executed in the background. So we type in class, let's name this thing as background task, and let's basically create this class, and let's basically make this thing extend async task. So we type extends async task, and initially we are going to set all the parameters to void. So this is going to be void, void and void. Okay, once we have set up the parameters, the next thing which we do is that we actually remove this error by implementing some methods into this, and this should be void. So basically we just hover over here and we click this light bulb and we click on implement methods, and we basically implement the do in background method. And we also need to actually implement a few more methods like the on pre-execute, on post-execute, and on progress update. So basically in order to insert those methods, what we do here is that we basically use code completion. So hold on the Alt key and hit the insert key, and basically go to override methods. So we select a few methods. So the first one is going to be on post execute, the second one is going to be on pre execute, and the final one is going to be on progress update. So once we select this, we hit OK, and these methods should be added over here. Now once we have added this method, we go into the background task.java class, and even before typing any code into the background task, we basically go right here and we create a new string and we call it as the JSON string. So we type string JSON underscore string. So basically we are going to need to store the JSON into some string, so we are going to save this into a variable called as JSON string. Now let's go ahead and create another string for the URL, and we are basically going to call it the JSON URL. So we go right here and we declare a string. So we type string JSON URL, and this URL is nothing but it is actually the URL where our actual PHP script lies. So in order to check where our actual PHP script lies, let's open Mozilla and let's open up 000 web host, and let's just basically log in our account. So click on members area. So let's go to cPanel, and this is nothing but the actual URL. So we simply open this thing up. So now as this is our URL, our actual JSON script lies at /JSON-getData.php. So we actually need this URL right here. So we simply copy this, we close this thing, and we simply paste this URL right over here. Okay, now once we have set up this URL, what we do is that we go inside the do in background method, and actually if this thing actually shows params, we actually replace it with void. This should be voids. Okay, so after this, let's go into the do in background method and basically create an object of URL. So we type URL, let's name this thing as URL equals, and actually we need to import URL, so hit Alt enter. So we type URL equals new URL, and to this we basically pass in the JSON URL which we have created. So we pass in the JSON URL, so we type JSON underscore URL, and now let's go ahead and resolve this error. So this actually says we need to surround with try catch, so surround this thing with a try catch, and after this we basically establish the connection. So we type HTTP URL connection, let's name the object as HTTP URL connection equals URL dot open connection, and we actually need to typecast this thing with HTTP URL connection. And now we also need to handle the exception which is associated with this. So let's go ahead and add a catch clause so as to handle the exception. Now the next thing which we do is that we create a buffered reader, so in order to basically read the data. And even before creating a buffered reader, let's go ahead and create an input stream reader. So in order to create an input stream reader, we type input stream, let's name this thing as input stream equals HTTP URL connection dot get input stream. And after this, let's go ahead and create the buffered reader. So we type buffered reader equals new buffered reader, and to this we basically pass in new input stream reader, and to this basically pass in the input stream object. So this is the input stream object. Okay, so once we have passed this thing in, we are basically good to go. Now let's go ahead and create a string builder. So we type string builder equals new string builder. And the reason for actually having the string builder is to basically collect all the data and store it into a string. So basically to loop through the entire data, we use a while loop. So we type while, and in this while we type in JSON string, which is nothing but the variable which we have created. So while JSON string equals, so basically we are going to use the buffered reader. So basically we are going to use the buffered reader and save the entire data into the JSON string. So we type buffered reader dot read line. So basically we say that while this thing is not equal to null, so unless and until this thing is null, we basically keep on executing the code which is written inside this. So basically don't forget to add brackets over here. So once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. Now let's go ahead and basically use the string builder to basically collect the data. So we type string builder dot append, and to this we basically pass in the JSON string, give a plus sign, and after the plus sign let's append a /n so as to basically add a new line. Okay, now once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. So now we basically close the buffered reader, we close the input stream reader, we close the HTTP URL connection, and finally we return the string builder object. So first let's go ahead and close the buffered reader. So we type buffered reader dot close. The next thing we could close is input stream. So we type input stream dot close. And finally we close the HTTP URL connection. So we type HTTP URL connection dot disconnect. So once we are done with this, final thing to do is to return the string builder. So we type return and then finally type in string builder dot toString dot trim. Okay, so now as this thing is going to return some value, what we need to do is that we actually need to change the return type of do in background. So replace this void by string and we are basically good to go. And also you need to replace this thing by a string as well. Okay, now once we have this method, we also need to go into the on pre-execute method. So basically let's go right here and we actually replace this void by a string as we have returned a string, and replace this thing by result, and we also delete this super, and instead of the super what we are going to type in is basically we are going to use the text view so as to basically assign the value. So we type text view equals, then we use find view by id. So we type find view by id r.id dot text view. So this text view is basically the id of the text view which we have added along with the two buttons. So once we have added in the text view, let's go ahead and set the text of the text view. So we type text view dot set text, and we actually want to save the text view to the result. So finally we pass in result over here. So what this line of code is going to do is that it is basically going to take the result and it is going to set the text view equal to result. And we have an error here, that is because we have not yet typecasted this thing. So let's typecast this thing to text view, and as you could see our error disappeared. Now after this what we need to do is that we need to go in the get JSON data method and basically call in the background task. So we type new background task dot execute, and what this thing is going to do is that it is basically going to execute the method inside the background task. So once this thing is done, we are good to go. So now if we run this application, what is going to happen is that when we click this button right here which says get JSON, it is basically going to retrieve JSON and it is going to display the JSON over here. So now let's just go ahead and save the code and we try to run this application on our device. So once we run this application, this is what we get. So we have two buttons, get JSON and pass JSON. Now let's go ahead and click the first button. And as you could see, when we hit the first button, which is get JSON, this is what we get. So basically we got the JSON on our Android application. So you might have noticed that when we try to run this application and when we click the get JSON button, we actually got the JSON, but the JSON was actually in not a proper formatted manner. So in the next tutorial, what we are going to do is that we are going to create a pass JSON method, which basically extracts the values from the JSON and it is going to actually represent it in a much more better way. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be working with the pass JSON method. So if we switch to the content main.xml, actually we have rendering problems. I think it is not rendered properly yet. So basically we have these two buttons here. First one is the get JSON and second one is the pass JSON. And in the previous tutorial we have actually run this application, and when we hit this button which says get JSON, we actually got the JSON. Now the next step would be to basically pass the JSON, and basically passing is nothing but you could say that arranging things in a proper format. So let's go ahead in main activity and create a new method which is called as pass JSON. So we type public, this should be public void, and let's name this thing as parse JSON, and again pass parameters as view. Now let's go ahead and use curly braces. Okay, now once we are done with this, the next thing which we do is that basically we actually got the result in the form of JSON. Now we are going to use the same JSON so as to pass it. So let's go ahead and create a new string and let's name this string as JSON string. So basically we already have a JSON string, so let's go ahead and create another string called as JSON string. So we type string JSON string and make sure that you name this string different from the previous string. So now once we have this string variable, let's go ahead and basically store some value into this. So basically we got the result on the post execute method right here. So let's go ahead and use the JSON string so as to basically save the result. So we type JSON string equals result. So what this line of code is going to do is that it is going to extract that weird looking stuff. It is going to basically extract the weird looking JSON and it is going to basically store it into the JSON string. Now our job is to basically convert that weird looking JSON into a proper format so that we could represent that onto our screen. So now the next thing would be to basically create a new activity to display a list view, which basically is going to list out the JSON in a much more proper fashion. So in order to do that, we simply open this folder, go to Java folder, go to the first folder, go to new and simply create a new activity. And let's say we have an empty activity right here, so select an empty activity and let's name this thing as display list view, and let's change the layout name to, let's say, display list view layout. Okay, so now once we have this thing, we are basically good to go. Now let's go ahead and click finish, and this should basically create a new layout for us. Okay, so as you could see, this is the activity for the display list view. Now the next thing which we do is that we basically go to the XML file of this layout. So this is nothing but the XML file of the display list view. Now let's go ahead, go to text and create a list view right over here. So we type in here list view, and for the layout width we are going to type in match parent, and for the layout height let's go ahead and type in wrap content. So once this thing is done, we are good to go. Now after this, what we do is that we want to actually switch to this layout, which is nothing but the display list view. when we basically click this button right here which says pass JSON. So the onClick method associated with pass JSON is this, which is called as pass JSON. So we have actually defined that method over here. So if we just scroll a little bit up, as you could see, this is our method right here. Now let's go ahead and create a new intent, which is basically going to start this newly created list view. So we go right here and we create an intent for it. So we type intent equals new intent, and to the intent we basically pass the reference as this, and then we type in the name of the class, which is nothing but display list view dot class. So what this thing is going to do is that it is going to create a new intent. Now also along with this intent, as we need to pass in additional parameters, we use the put extras method. So we type intent dot put extras, and the additional parameter which we actually want to pass in is nothing but the JSON string, which actually has the JSON. So let's name this thing as JSON data, and then we pass in the actual string which actually lies in JSON string. So once we have passed in the string, let's go ahead and let's basically start the new activity. So we type in start activity, and now let's just pass in the intent to this. So we type in intent over here. So now once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. Now in order to basically extract the passed message, we again go to display list view.java, and here we go right here and we basically create a new variable called as JSON string. So we type in string, let's name the string as JSON string, and actually it is better if we create the JSON string over here. So let's type in string JSON string. Now let's go ahead and get the data from the intent and save it into the variable called JSON string. So we type JSON string equals get intent dot get extras, and get extras is basically the method to get the additional parameters passed to the intent. And finally again we use the get string method to basically get the string associated with that intent, and then we basically specify which string which we want to get. So we want to get the string which is called as JSON data. Okay, so now once we have the string, we could go ahead and basically pass the JSON. Now even before passing the JSON, the next thing which we actually need to do is that we actually need to create a new layout which basically allows us to what we could say display each and every row of the database table into an activity. So for that we again create a new layout resource file. So simply go over here. So basically in order to create a new layout, we go to the resources folder, go to the layout folder, right click on it, go to new and select a layout resource file. Now let's name this layout resource file as, let's say, row layout, and change the root element to relative layout. Okay, now once this thing is done, simply click OK and our new layout should be created. So as you could see, this is our new layout, and if we switch to the text view and if we switch on the preview, if your preview is not enabled, so simply click this button and it should be enabled right over here. Now the next thing which we do is that we change the height of this thing to, let's say, 75 dps. So let's go ahead and first change this thing to 75 dp. Okay, now once we are done with this, we basically go ahead and create a text view over here. So we type in text view, and for the layout height or for the layout width we type in 120 dps, and for the layout height we are going to type in, let's say, match parent. So once we have added the text view, as you could see, this is our text view right here, and basically we have also created a list view. So this thing right here is our list view, and also we actually need to assign an ID to this list view. So we type Android ID equals @ID, and let's assign the value as list view to this. So once this is done, we again switch back to the row layout, and for the row layout, the next thing which we do is that we basically align the very first element to the left. So in order to do that, we type in Android layout align parent left and make this thing equals true. So this should be aligned to the left, and then we specify the text to this. So we type Android text equals, let's say, my name Ashu, and now let's assign the gravity to center. So we type gravity center, and now let's also set the text appearance. So we type text appearance question mark Android text appearance, and let's set the text appearance to, let's say, large. Okay, now once this thing is done, the next thing which we do is that we are also going to add 4 more text views so as to basically represent the email, contact and password. So this is for the name. So we also need a text view for the email, contact and password. So even before doing that, we also assign an ID to this. So this is the text view for the name. So we type in Android ID equals @ID, and let's name it as TX, which stands for text view underscore name. So what we could do is that we could simply copy this and create a new text view over here, and we actually need to change a few things here. So this is going to be TX underscore email, as this is for email, and for the parent left we are going to remove this. Also we are going to remove the gravity, and basically we are going to use a method which is called as to left off. So we type to left off. So basically we are going to use Android layout to right off. So basically we want to place this thing to the right of the first text view. So we type to right of @ID TX underscore name. So this is going to place the second text view to the right of this, and I think we actually need to specify the gravity. So we type Android gravity center. Basically once we are done with this, we are good to go. So again we need 2 more text views. So I'm going to simply copy this code, paste it, change the email to contact. So we type TX underscore contact, and we type in to right of email, and I'm going to do the same thing with the final text view. And the thing is that it is actually not going to fit in the 4 text views over here. So let's go ahead and reduce the width of this thing to, let's say, 80 dps instead of 120. So make this 80, this thing 80, and the final one 80 as well. Now let's go ahead and copy the text view and create the final text view. So again this final one is going to be for password. So we type TX underscore password, change this email to, let's say, contact. So once we are done with this, as you could see, we are basically done, and actually change this 80 to 80 dps, or else you are going to get an error. Okay, so now once we are done with this, as you could see, our text view are pretty much done. So in the next tutorial, what we are going to do is that we are going to learn how to use the JSON data and how to actually set these 4 text views to the JSON data which we have extracted from the database. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be basically continuing with the JSON project. So now once we have designed this layout right here, the next thing which we could do is that we could basically go ahead and create a new class so as to set the actual content of these text views from the database. So let's go ahead and create a new class which is a Java class. So let's go ahead and name this class as, let's say, contacts, and what this class is going to do is that it is going to set the actual data for these 4 fields. So let's go ahead and type in contacts and simply click OK. And now once we have this class, what we are going to do is that we are basically going to declare variables which are nothing but the fields of our database. So we type private string, first one is name, second one is contact, then we have the email, and finally we have the password. And also make sure that you name this class as contacts and not contact, and that is because we actually have contact over here, so you might get a bug in your program if you do so. So now once we have this thing, we actually use the getters and setters method so as to basically set these things. So basically, in order to add getters and setters, we use code completion. So simply hold Alt and hit insert and select getters and setters. So we basically select all methods which are present over here and simply click OK. And what this is going to do is that it is basically going to add the getters and setters for all the 4 parameters. So once we have the getters and setters method, let's go ahead and basically create a constructor. So basically now we create a constructor. So in order to create a constructor, we go right here and then we type in public contacts, and basically let's pass in the parameters. So this is going to be string name comma string, this should be comma not dot, so comma string email, or the second parameter is contact, so string contact, then we have string password, and even before that we have a variable called as email, so we type string email. So once we have these 4 parameters in the same sequence, so name, contact, string and email, so basically we create a constructor, and inside the constructor we basically type in this dot set name. So basically to this we pass in the name, again we use this dot set email and simply pass in the email, then we type this dot set contact and we pass in the contact, and finally we type this dot set password and simply pass in password. And also I'm going to basically use this in the same format so as to avoid confusion, so name, contact, email and password. So once we are done with this, we are basically good to go. And also the actual proper format is name, email, contact and password. So in order to avoid confusion, I am going to replace this thing. So I'm going to basically change the order, and it does not matter, but actually if we miss out on something then it may affect our code. So I'm going to basically replace this and place them in a proper order. So now once we are done with this, we actually need to create a custom adapter for the list view. So basically what we need to do is that in order to set a custom adapter for basically populating the list view, we actually need to create another new class, and we actually need to name it custom adapter, and actually we have a comma here which we don't need, so simply remove this. And now let's go ahead and create a brand new class called custom adapter. So let's name this class as, let's say, contact adapter, hit OK. And now in this class what we are basically going to do is that we are going to make this thing extend to array adapter. So we type extends array adapter, and actually as you could see it is showing us an error. So if we simply click on this, it is asking us to create a constructor. So we basically create a constructor and select the first option and hit OK. So once we have the constructor, we are basically good to go. Now we also need to add some methods to this. So basically we need to add in 4 methods. So the first method is add, the next method is get count, the next method is get item, and the final method is the get view method. So let's just basically go ahead and add a first method, which is add. So we type this add method. Then the next method is the get count method. So we type get count, and once we have the get count method, we type in the get item method. So we type get item as the next method, and after the get item method we type in the get view method. So we type get view. So basically once we have added all these methods, now let's just go ahead and create a new list. So we go right here and we type in list equals new, and the type of list is going to be array list. So once we have this array list, we go to display list view.java. So this is the display list view.java, and inside on create, and inside this we basically create a new JSON object and new JSON array. So we type JSON object, let's name this thing as JSON object, and we also create a JSON array. So we type JSON array, name this thing as JSON array, and then we go inside on create. So we basically go right here and then type in JSON object equals new JSON object, and basically to this JSON object we pass in the JSON string which we have. So we type in JSON string. So basically we are converting this string to array, and actually we have an error here. So if we click this light bulb, we need to surround it with try catch. Okay, now once it is surrounded with try catch, what we could do is that we could use a variable which is called as count to basically keep track. So we type int count, initialize it to 0, and then finally use the JSON array. So we type JSON array equals, so basically we get the data from the JSON object which we have. So we type JSON array equals JSON object dot get JSON array, and basically we actually want the JSON array whose name is server response. So we simply type in server response over here. So what this thing is going to do is that it is basically going to get the JSON array which basically is named as the server response. So once this thing is done, we are basically good to go. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we again need to create the variables with name, email, contact and password. So we type string, and actually not here, we actually need to create it outside the try block. So let's type in string. So we type string name, email, contact and finally password. Okay, now once we have these things, we again switch back and go inside the try block, and here we are going to basically write in the while loop so as to loop through the array. So we type while, and inside it we type in while count. So count is basically the variable which we have initialized. So basically while count is less than the JSON array, so basically the length of the JSON array is JSON array dot length. So this basically returns the length, and while the count is less than JSON array dot length, so unless and until the array is actually traversed completely. So in that case what we do is that we create a JSON object. Let's name this thing as JO equals JSON array dot get JSON object, and basically here we need to specify the index. So we specify the index as count. So after this we actually need to get the elements. So the very first thing which we get is name. So we type name equals JO, which is nothing but the JSON object. Then we use the get string method. So we type get string, and the string name is going to be name. After this we do the same thing for email, contact and password. So I'm going to simply copy this line and I'm going to paste it thrice, and I'm going to modify this thing to email, this thing to contact, this thing to password, and I'm also going to change this thing to email, this thing to contact, and the final thing to password. Okay, now once we have changed everything, the next thing which we do is that we actually need to create the object of this class and basically pass in the parameters so as to set the contents. So we create an object of this class. So we create the object of this class by typing contacts equals new contacts, and basically pass in the name, email, contact and finally pass in the password. And the final thing which we do is that we increment the count variable. So we type count plus plus. So now once we are done with this, we basically create the object of the contact adapter. So basically in order to create the contact adapter, we go right here, and right here we create a variable. So we type contact adapter. Let's name this thing as contact adapter. So once we have the contact adapter, let's go into the onCreate right below the set content view and basically set up the contact adapter. So we type contact adapter equals new contact adapter, and to this we pass in this comma r dot layout dot, and basically we pass in the row layout. So we type row layout to this. So once we have basically passed this thing in, let's go ahead and create a list view and basically set the list view. So basically, in order to create the object of the list view, we initially go here and create the object here. So we type list view, let's name this thing as list view, and again we go here right below the contact adapter and then type in list view equals find view by id r dot id dot, and the id of the list view is nothing but list view. And also we need to typecast this thing to avoid an error, so make sure that you typecast it, and once you typecast it, the error should be gone. Now after this we set the list view to the adapter, so we type list view dot set adapter, and to this we pass in the contact adapter. Now the final thing which we do is that we again go inside the while, which is nothing but this, and here we actually need to set up the contact adapter and basically add the contact over here. So basically we go ahead and type in contact adapter dot add and actually add in contacts to this. So basically don't type in contact, type in contacts. That is because this is the object of this class which is called as contacts. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be actually completing the final code for this application. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we'll be writing the final piece of code so as to basically run our Android application, which is nothing but the JSON application, which is basically going to extract the data from the database. So now the only thing which remains is that we actually need to set up a few things inside the contacts.java class, and also we actually need to inflate the layout, which is nothing but the layout to display the contents by using the layout inflator. So now the next thing which we do is that we set a few things inside this contacts.java class, and also we actually need to set up some contents in the contact adapter. So we basically go to the add method, and inside the add method we basically change this thing to contact and basically remove the override right over here, and under super we type in list.add and also pass in the object over here. Now go to the get count method and remove this return super method, and instead type in return list dot size. So this thing is basically going to return the size of the list. Now go to the get item and basically replace this by return list dot get and basically pass in the position. So simply pass in the position here and we are good to go. Now the next thing which we do is that basically go under all the methods and basically go ahead and create a static class here which is called as contact holder, so as to basically hold the contacts. And what this class is going to do is that it is basically going to use the layout inflator to basically inflate the layouts. So we type in static class, not char, class, and let's name this as contact holder. So we type contact holder, and to this class inside the first thing which we type in is going to be the text view. So we type text view tx underscore name, tx underscore email, comma tx underscore contact, and finally tx underscore password. So once this thing is set up, we go inside the get view method, which is basically right here, and right before the return what we do is that we create a new view. So we type view row, let's name this view as row. So we type row equals convert view, and basically once we have this we check if the row is equal to null. So we go right here and we type if
row, if this thing is equal to null, in that case we type in some code. So basically if the row is null, we basically want to inflate the layout by using the layout inflator. So let's go ahead and type in layout inflator. Let's name this thing as layout inflator equals, then we type this dot get context dot get system service, and to this we basically pass in context dot layout inflator service. So what this thing is going to do is that it is basically going to create a layout inflator, and basically this is going to show us an error. We actually need to typecast it to layout inflator. So as soon as we typecast it, as you could see, the error is gone. Now let's go ahead and basically use the layout inflator. So we type row equals layout inflator, which is the layout inflator object. Then we type the inflate method so as to basically inflate the layout. So we type inflate r dot layout dot row layout, and after this the second parameter which we need to pass is going to be parent, and the final parameter is going to be false. So this is basically the layout inflator which we use in Android to basically inflate the layout. And now let's go ahead and create the object of the contact holder class which we have just declared right over here. So we go right here and type in contact holder, which is nothing but the class which we have right now. So we type contact holder, and now we go inside the if. Right below the row we type contact holder equals new contact holder. Now once we have the contact holder, we basically use the contact holder to set the elements like name, email and password. So once we have the contact holder object, we could basically set these variables inside the contact holder. So we type contact holder dot tx name equals, then we typecast this thing to text view, then we type row dot find view by id, and inside the id we type r dot id dot tx underscore name. So this is basically going to set the text view, and basically we are going to do the same thing with the rest of the three elements. So I'm going to simply copy this, paste it over here, change this to email, this thing to contact, this thing to password, and also do the relevant changes over here. So change this to email, contact and password. So once we are done with this, the next line of code which we write is row dot set tag. So basically it is used to set tag, and we pass in the contact holder object over here. So we type in contact holder over here, and else we are going to type in contact holder equals, and basically if this condition it is not true, we actually get the tag. So we basically typecast this thing to contact holder. So we type contact holder, then we type row dot get tag. So after this we basically go outside the else tag, which is right over here, and here basically we are going to create an object of contacts. So we type in contacts, not context, contacts. So we type contacts equals, then basically typecast this thing to contacts, and then we type in this dot get item and basically pass in the position to this. Then we basically set the name, email and password again. So we type contact holder dot tx underscore name dot set text. So set text is basically a method to set the text, and to this we finally pass in contacts, which is nothing but the object of contacts, and use a method which is called as the get name method so as to get the name. And basically we are going to do the same thing for email, contact and password. So basically here we had a reference to the
4 text fields. Now we are basically going to set the text fields over here. So I'm going to simply copy this thing, paste it thrice. So this is for the email, contact and password, and this is for the get email. So I'm going to replace this by get email, replace this thing by get contact, and this thing by get password. And finally, once everything is done, the last thing which we could do is that we could go here, and instead of this return super, we could remove this and type in return row. So once this thing is done, we are good to go. So the coding for the entire application is complete. So now let's go ahead and save the code and try to run this application on an actual device. So in the next tutorial, we'll be running this application on an actual device and see how it works. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. So now let's go ahead and let's try to run this application on an actual device and see how it works. So I'm going to run this application on my device, and I'm going to simultaneously record the screen. So when I run this application, this is what I get. So if I hit get JSON, we actually got the JSON, and when I hit pass JSON, as you could see, the data is actually retrieved and is displayed into the list view right here. So that's basically it for this tutorial, and we are successful in creating the JSON application so as to basically retrieve the data from the database. So basically JSON is the most commonly used data interchange mechanism which are used in most Android applications, and basically whenever you try to retrieve the data for your Android application, so JSON is the most preferable way to do that. So basically in this tutorial, what we have done is that we have basically created the main activity, which basically has two methods. So if we open this thing up, this is what we get in the main activity. So basically we had two methods, the get JSON and pass JSON, and just for the sake of understanding, we have these two methods as a separate. Now what you could do is that you could combine these two methods. So basically if you are creating an Android application and if you want to extract data from the database, so simply use a combination of these two methods. So the first method is going to extract JSON and the second one is going to pass the JSON so that we could actually display it. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope that you guys understood how to create a JSON application to retrieve the data from the database. So basically we have learned how to insert the data into the database. We have also learned how to basically retrieve the data using the database, and the other two operations, which are basically the delete and modify operations, are basically simple. So you only need to pass the data and basically just modify the SQL queries a little bit. So these were the two complex methods which we actually perform while writing Android applications, and we have covered this in this course. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and thank you for taking this course. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and congratulations on making it to our very special bonus lecture. Now, thank you so much for enrolling in our course and taking our course all the way to the end here. And I really wanted to share with you something that I've created and I'm really excited about. I've created my very own website where I've hosted all of my online courses. And since you've taken this course, I would love to see you in many of my other courses, and I want to give you the absolute best value and create an awesome win-win situation. So the first thing that you have to know is all you have to type into your URL browser is just joeparis.com, and you will hit my website. Once you hit my website, you will see I'll have a featured course, and then I have all my best-selling courses right underneath for you to enroll in. Now, each one of these has a very special coupon, and as you can see right now, they're all about 50% off. In fact, every one of my courses is at the highest discount possible, and as a student, I know that if I really enjoyed working with an instructor and taking one of their courses, I would really love to, take another one. And because you've done that with me, I really want to share more of the information that I have, and I really want you to feel good about enrolling in another course. So I want to give you a discount, and if you enroll in my course directly from my website, I also win because I get 97% of that revenue. So I highly encourage you, if you really want to take any of my other courses, please come to my website, joeparis.com, click on any of the courses here, and you can instantly enroll. Also, you can view all of my courses by clicking this button, or you can simply go all the way to the top and click on Udemy courses, and you'll be able to see all of my courses here as well. Now, if there's a special course or you want to enroll in multiple courses, I highly suggest that you do so in a very timely manner, because these coupons will expire, and the prices that you're seeing here today may go up in value. The market's always changing, and I'm always creating new courses. So take advantage of this. And I wanted to share this with you because I really do value your opinion as a student. I really do value you as a student, and I really would love to see you again in another one of my courses. And I figure this is a really great way to share and to do that. So all you have to do is go to joeparis.com. There's a bunch of free content as well, which is what I want to share with you here really quickly. I have my own YouTube channel. So my YouTube channel is just Joe Paris Academy. You can get to it through my website by just clicking here to subscribe. I really, really would appreciate your subscriptions, because the more subscriptions I get, the more videos I can upload and put up there for you. And I have a lot of free previews of my courses. So if you are interested in enrolling in one of my courses, I have a lot of free previews that you can check out just by subscribing to my YouTube channel. And I have a free course here that you can take at any time. And if you want even more bonuses, a great way to really stay in touch is to enter your name and email, and I'm constantly sending out my latest updates, my bi-weekly post for my blog, giving you more strategies on how to take amazing online courses, and special discounts in my email. So another great way is to just sign up. All you got to do is put your name and email to get instant access to that. I send those out, and just wanted to share some awesome free stuff here. And if you're really, really interested, I have my own coaching programs where you can literally enroll in a coaching program directly with me. If you're interested in teaching online, or maybe you want to build your confidence, and I even have a goal achieving program, and they're very reasonably priced. So if you're interested in working with me, I'm very interested in working with you, and would love to see you in my coaching programs as well as any of my other Udemy courses. So just wanted to share this very special bonus with you, and just kind of take you through my website. You can also go to my Facebook page, Twitter, my LinkedIn, again, my YouTube channel, and I also have a blog. So if you click my blog, you will see that I have discussions and case studies every week. So you'll get to see here that, I go through how to do a lot of amazing things online. So all you got to do is go to my academy, which is just joeparis.com. And, or if you want to go to my YouTube channel, all you got to do is type in Joe Paris Academy and go ahead and click that subscribe button. It's just starting. I'm literally uploading videos as we speak here. So looking to grow and to see you there. And thank you so much for enrolling in my courses. I really, really do appreciate each and every one of you. And I have more than 100,000 students at this point. It's very exciting. And by the time that you even watch this video, there could be 2 to 3 times as many of those students, and I could have 2 to 3 times as many courses as well. So really looking forward to the opportunity to continue to serve you. Thanks again for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in our next class.